Hello, everyone, and welcome to you all. This is a True North special broadcast. I'm Andrew Lott, and we are here for the first and only leaders debate of the Alberta election. It would not be an Alberta panel without some tremendous Alberta correspondents. We have our True North colleagues, William McBeth and Rachel Emmanuel here. It is going to be an exciting night, and it's good to have both of you here with us. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Looking forward to it. It's been a busy week, so I'm sure we'll have lots to discuss.
We have obviously had some coverage of the Alberta election on my show, on True North, on Rachel's show. William, you've been slacking. You haven't done any original coverage, but I know you're going to make up for it with your contributions to the discussion this evening. But let's just talk about the lay of the land here, because the debate is going to be in exactly 1 hour. And this will be, as I mentioned, the first and only time that the leaders of the major parties are squaring off. But the one thing I should say, and this is, I think, especially noteworthy if you have been familiarized with federal leaders debates, there are just going to be the two leaders here of Rachel Notley and Danielle Smith. There's not going to be an Alberta Liberal leader, an Alberta Green leader, an Alberta Party leader. It's just going to be the two. And I think that will actually change the dynamic a fair bit. So let's start with that, Rachel. I mean, these two women have not really squared off outside of the legislature in this forum.
No, I think this is probably the most effective format for people watching, because this is really an election where people, especially moderates in Calgary, which we've seen both parties seeking to appeal to, they're trying to decide, do we think that a NDP government under Rachel Notley would be worse for the province, or are we more concerned about Danielle Smith's record? Obviously, the mainstream media and the Alberta NDP have done their best to paint Danielle Smith as crazy, pulling her old podcast clips, taking a lot of stuff out of context. And so that's really what the election has turned into for a lot of people. It's a pretty simple ballot box question. So we're definitely going to see Danielle Smith attempting to just stay on track, get her message, not say anything to rile anyone up. She's the better debater of the two of them. She's really strong on public policy. Rachel Notley hasn't been strong on policy during this issue. She's throwing a lot of slander around, a lot of lies. Danielle Smith is going to be right there, able to call her out on that. So I'm really interested to see how this plays out. I think a lot of it will depend on the questions that they're asked. Sometimes these debates can be so tedious when the questions are irrelevant, and the format, how much time they're actually given to debate. So those are some of the things I'm going to be looking at. But the fact that it's only the two leaders, I think, is probably the best for Albertans to decide right now.
Yeah, and in the 2019 election, which was the previous election, you had four leaders there. But now, I mean, if you look at the polling, there's basically a near 100% chance that it's only going to be MLAs from the NDP and the UCP that are elected. And not to get too bogged down by Alberta political history, but William, how did Alberta become a two-party system in this way?
Yeah, I mean, it is quite interesting. If you look back to 1993, and not to spend too much time on this, but that was an election where it was the PCs under Ralph Klein versus the Liberal Party under Lawrence Daccord. And Ralph and the PCs won by just a couple percent in that election. It was a very close election. So to go from that in 1993 to where the Liberals will not win a single seat in this election, what a sea change in how it's worked in Alberta. And I think the truth is you've seen a consolidation of parties behind the two that are now really contesting the election. There are some parties on the right, some smaller parties on the right, but they have seen their support collapse to the UCP. There are some parties on the left, but they've been unable to earn any sort of material support. All of their support's gone to the NDP. So unlike back in the 90s and 2000s, where there were three-way elections, or at least 2.5-way elections, this is now very much a Republicans versus Democrats type scenario. You've only got two.
Yeah, and as a result of that, the NDP in Alberta is not exactly, I mean, this may be a contentious point, it's not exactly like the NDP you'd see elsewhere. And even on this campaign, Rachel, I mean, Rachel Notley has run a fairly moderate campaign. I mean, some of the policies she's put forward have really been things that you wouldn't find uncharacteristic in a conservative platform even.
Well, absolutely. And I think from what I've been hearing, it's caught the United Conservative Party government a little bit off guard with some of the comments I've heard from people. They're like, oh, why is Rachel Notley running so to the middle? And I think it's because she doesn't want to scare voters off. The economy is just finally back on track after years of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're still in record high inflation, but jobs are strong here. The economy is growing. And so people don't want to be reminded of what it was like under a Rachel Notley government when her policies chased investment and chased jobs out of the province. So we've been seeing her appeal to those moderates just as much as Danielle has. There's been a lot of parallels between their campaigns. And so voters are really going to have to look at the policies closely, which often most voters don't do. There is some people who pay really close attention. Most people just kind of want a snapshot, a bigger picture. The one policy that we've really seen from Rachel Notley, which is more of what in line of what you would think of when you think of the Alberta NDP, is their one promise that they were going to hike corporate taxes. And we know from assessments that that would chase jobs out of the province as well. So that's really the one policy we've seen that's very indicative of an NDP government. But on other things, she's even been saying that she no longer supports safe supply, things like that. Thinking that we might have lost our other colleagues here for a minute. I'm not seeing anybody else.
The NDP federally. And I think, for example, we haven't seen Jagmeet Singh really pitching in to support Rachel Notley here, have we?
No, we haven't seen Jagmeet Singh come on at all. I think someone might have cut it out for a second, so sorry if I'm jumping in and cutting someone off, but I'm going to go ahead and jump and answer this question anyways. Yeah, we haven't seen Jagmeet Singh. We saw Stephen Harper release sort of a endorsement for the Conservative Party, but even in that endorsement, he didn't really talk about Danielle Smith. He kind of just kept it general and said, look, Alberta's back on track. They're what's best for the province right now. The vote for the United Conservative wasn't really an endorsement of Danielle Smith, and we know that her brand of conservatism isn't for everybody, and that has certainly turned off some more establishment conservatives. So it's interesting that Harper didn't acknowledge her in that video, but still, generally a good thing for the party to get that kind of endorsement.
Now, I mean, obviously the big story when Danielle Smith became the UCP leader was it was one of the greatest political comebacks we've seen in Canada. Danielle Smith went from, losing a very winnable election more than 10 years ago to losing the support of her own party, losing a nomination. I remember when she started her radio gig, she was just reviled by Alberta Conservatives, but now has become, probably one of the most popular figures in the Conservative movement. So let me talk to you about this, William, for two reasons. Number one, I think your analysis of Alberta politics is on point, but you were also on that campaign back in 2012. So how do you, or what would you say about the Danielle Smith of 2023 compared to the Danielle Smith you worked with?
Yeah, just to harken back to your other point, I'm absolutely certain Rachel Notley and the New Democrats told Jagmeet Singh, do not come to Alberta. Do not try and help me at all during this election. In fact, if you could forget we even know each other, that would be the best possible thing for my chances of becoming premier. Because, of course, Rachel Notley, the last time she won, there were two Conservative parties on the ballot. This will be the first time it's ever just been a United Conservative Party versus the New Democrats, and we'll see what the outcome is. But talking about Danielle Smith, you're right. Arguably the most spectacular fall from grace that a Conservative politician has had since possibly the Devine government in Saskatchewan, when a lot of them ended up in jail. But if you had asked me at the time, would she come back to Alberta politics, my answer would have been absolutely not. In fact, I recall writing a column or an op-ed that said the Danielle Smith era of Alberta politics has ended, because I simply did not see a way for her to overcome the huge amount of anger and betrayal that people felt about it. So the fact that she not only did that, she took her lumps, she got yelled at for months. She had a radio show where for the first 6 months, a year, everybody was piling on about how upset they were about what she did. And to then go on and win a leadership race, I think is a testament to her tenacity and the fact that she was willing to suffer through all of those sins and that punishment in order to do something which she believed. And I think a lot of Conservatives really appreciate that she was willing to take the tough love or the anger and outrage and channel it into something else. But you of course do see, as Rachel said, some division on the Conservative side about whether or not they support Danielle Smith. You've got Ken Bosenkohl and a few others writing op-eds saying that she's not a Conservative, she shouldn't be elected. You've got endorsements, though, from Stephen Harper and others who say, the only path forward in Alberta is a Conservative government. And I think that's the real ballot question people are facing this time is what are they more afraid of? Are they more afraid of crazy Danielle Smith, or that's what her opponents and the mainstream media would have you believe? Are they more afraid of crazy Danielle Smith or Rachel Notley's terrible economic policies? Which one of those two unpleasant choices are they least supportive of? I don't think anybody's voting, apart from vocal minorities on either side, out of love for these candidates. It's more about which do you dislike the most.
We are, if you're just tuning in, about 49 minutes away from the start of the one and only leaders debate in this year's Alberta election. We're going to carry that live here at True North, but we will talk about the campaign, the race, the themes, the debate, and all of that between now and then. I'm Andrew Lawton, joined by Rachel Emmanuel and William McBeth from True North. Let's talk about the overarching campaign theme for a minute, Rachel, because I know that earlier on, months ago, there was this thought that I had and some others advanced that this might really be Danielle Smith versus Justin Trudeau in a way, more than Danielle Smith versus Rachel Notley. And I think we saw in the leadership race the Sovereignty Act, which then became the first legislation of this government. And I think that there is something to that the UCP was really looking at Ottawa as being its main nemesis. But I mean, maybe I've been missing it. I haven't actually really seen that dynamic in the election. I haven't really seen federal issues become the ones that Danielle Smith has really tried to stake out a place on. Have I missed something, or is that your read too?
No, and one of the reasons you haven't seen that dichotomy play out is because Danielle Smith is campaigning to an entirely different group of voters than she was campaigning to during the UCP leadership race, in which she was really appealing to those voters who felt left behind by Ottawa, who felt hurt by their federal government, who felt frustrated by government overreach during the COVID-19 pandemic. She came out the strongest against the pandemic policy that we saw. You know, she was really outspoken in that, and she kind of stood alone in the field. A lot of those other candidates couldn't run against the government's record because they had been a part of the government during the COVID-19 pandemic, and they had sort of stood by while those policies were passed, and then were forced to kind of come out and say, well, you know, I didn't agree with it, and I can't really acknowledge what I said because that would be breaching cabinet confidences, but I can tell you that I wasn't in favor of it. But it certainly wasn't a strong argument, and I think they know they didn't have a leg to stand on. So we didn't see that same pitch from them. That was Danielle Smith's campaign during the leadership race. It was effective. We know she won. It was close. I think she won on the last ballot. And I think that speaks to the fact that the Conservative Party still wasn't sure about her, you know, not 100%. We didn't see her. It wasn't a Pierre Poilievre victory where he won on the first ballot with about 70% support from the base. So we are still seeing a bit of that split within the party right now. People not sure how to feel about her. And as a result, we've seen Danielle now appealing to the moderates, which everyone expected her to do. Now, to her credit, she hasn't turned on her base. I think some people are really upset about the decision to remove Jennifer Johnson from the UCP caucus if she wins her election, which she's 100% likely to do because that is a Conservative safe seat. You know, some people are upset about that. Other people understand and say this is the right decision.
For people that haven't followed that, just because that happened today, can you just give some context on that?
Sure. So the other day, it came out that Jennifer Johnson had made some comments basically referring to trans ideology as crap, and saying that by teaching trans ideology in schools, you're mixing crap in with the baked goods. And so these comments were widely condemned. People were like, this is extremely transphobic. This is extremely homophobic. You know, maybe it was about 2 days ago. It just blew up the news cycle. It was dominating headlines for days. People across the board were really, really upset and saying, Danielle Smith, you need to get rid of this candidate. Earlier this morning, the decision came down that if Jennifer Johnson wins her election in Lacombe-Ponoka, she will not sit with the UCP caucus. At this point, it is too late to remove Jennifer Johnson from the ballot. She will be on the ballot. This is something similar that happened with the Liberal government when close to the election, it came out a candidate had done some untoward things, and the Liberals didn't really want to be associated with him. So they said, you know what, he's still going to run, but if he wins his election, he will sit as an independent candidate. So this is sometimes done as a practice when it's too late for a party to get rid of a candidate that they no longer want to associate with their party. So that was a decision that came down this morning. You know, some Conservatives that really supported Danielle during the leadership race were really upset by this decision. I think other people understood. But again, this is Danielle winning to the general Alberta population. She's winning to appeal to a broader group of people. She knows that she is to keep some of those MLAs in Calgary happy. Some of them feel like they can't win under her. We've been hearing reports that they haven't really been campaigning under Danielle Smith. They've more been campaigning as their own independent MLA. That's not similar to what we saw under Jason Kenney. So she is running a different campaign, and I think she's really trying to position herself against Rachel Notley's record as premier, because a lot of people in Alberta were really unhappy during that time period. They saw jobs and investment leave the province, and so the UCP has been, trying really hard to remind people of Rachel Notley's record as premier.
Let's do a little bit of 2012-2023 comparison again, which I know is your favorite pastime, William. Lake of Fire, political history. Everyone knows the incident in 2012 that, largely people argued cost Danielle Smith the election. Do you see shades of that in the Jennifer Johnson debacle?
Oh, absolutely. I cannot overstate the impact that had on our 2012 Wildrose election. And I'll tell you something that I found interesting was we did some polling or some focus grouping after that election to try and determine where Wildrose stood in the minds of typical voters when it came to issues like, do you think we're extreme? Do you think we're intolerant? And when we talked to people afterwards, they said, look, no, we don't think your party, by and large, is a party that is extreme. We don't think Danielle Smith is an extremist or is intolerant. But what this made us think was she wasn't up to making the tough choices you have to make when you're a premier. They said her decision to not fire Alan Huntsberger, who was the candidate who had made those comments, showed a failure of leadership. And therefore, they didn't think she was ready for the job of being premier. Now, I would say, I think if she had fired him or had said that he would not sit in a Wildrose caucus, she would have become premier at the end of that election. And to her credit, I think she learned that very painful lesson and wasn't about to let it happen again in this time. There is simply no way you can message around the fact that the very unpleasant analogy used by that candidate was, it's like mixing pooping with the cookie dough. And I don't think there was no amount of explanation that was going to make that particular analogy come across as anything other than unreasonable or extreme. And so I think she decided not to make the same mistake twice.
Let's shift gears here a little bit and talk about the format that we can expect tonight. And I know that we did talk about how it's going to be one-on-one, which will certainly be interesting here. But let's also talk about why, not that we don't love having you here, Rachel, but let's talk about why you're here with us and not at the debate.
Yeah, absolutely. So the parties, they planned this debate. They gave the rights over to organize the debate to the debate consortium, who handed it over to CTV to organize. So we know that the debate is going to be happening at a location, maybe CTV's Edmonton office. It was sort of an undisclosed location. They kept bringing up the fact that there was major privacy concerns. So when I emailed CTV the other day to get accreditation to attend the event, they said to me, oh, sorry, this is for Alberta Press Gallery members only. My application with the Press Gallery has been ongoing for months.
And by the way, the Alberta Press Gallery has no jurisdiction over anything other than journalists in the Alberta legislature.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is just a very hand-picked small group of people that are now being invited to attend the debate. They said the reason for that was that it was safety and security issues. And I said, well, I've been a member of the Press Gallery in the past. I can assure you I'm no security threat. And they said, oh, no, we don't think that you're a security threat, but we only have a limited number of security and it's a small space, so we're going to have to limit it. And I sort of explained to them that this would result in most of independent media being barred from the debate, which is probably, of course, what they were sort of hoping for. And they said, yes, a lot of people won't be able to attend, but this was just a decision to make. So I was not able to attend the debate in person, which is less of an issue, except that there will be a scrum with both of the leaders afterwards that I will not be able to participate in, which is frustrating. It'll be largely mainstream media reporters at that scrum. The Western Standard might be able to send someone, so they might have a presence there. But very frustrating. And the one thing that I'm kind of caught up on is, well, the UCP often champions independent media. Danielle Smith especially has been a big champion of independent media. She talks about how great it is that all these new outlets are now working and growing in this space. And I think it was an oversight on their part not to ensure that we wouldn't be given fair access and fair treatment to attend this debate. I think that's something that they need to look at in the future and say, we'll go to this debate, but we're going to have some terms of our own that you have to meet.
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, my personal desire might be for the UCP to take this principled stand, but I realize in all the issues that they are contending with, this isn't necessarily the one they want to die on. But there are ways around it. Like Danielle Smith could say, you know what, we're going to have a scrum outside the debate hall, and we're going to take questions from all journalists who show up. And generally, the UCP, as you mentioned, has been very good about allowing all journalists to go there. The NDP has not, and this has actually become independent media a bit of a running theme in this election campaign. Now, you've just like been elbows up and you've been getting in there, and Rachel Notley's been taking your questions because you shout them loud enough that she can hear them even without you getting the microphone. But she's not been as conducive to answering other independent journalist questions.
This has been one of the strangest parts of the campaign. It has been really weird to see how the NDP have responded to independent media. I have to say that I don't think their tactics have been very successful and have definitely not been a good look for them. So yeah, basically they've made a decision to largely ban independent media reporters from their events altogether. The first event I showed up, they just decided they were going to take questions from legacy media journalists in the room. And the way that that worked was the communication staffer that was running the event would hold the microphone, he would pass it to a journalist, and he would take it back in between. That's a pretty standard practice, but it also means that reporters can't just sort of casually pass the mic to each other. It also is a very formal way of doing an event, whereas typically on Parliament Hill, there'll be like a scrum and reporters will just kind of yell their question. The person who yells the loudest gets their question answered. And so at this specific event, the first one I went to from the Alberta NDP, they just decided not to hand me the mic. And as soon as they were done taking questions from all the legacy media journalists, they went to the phones. I knew that was a tactic because they didn't want to take my question. And so I just decided to yell my question out. It was a pretty small room. They were still live streaming the event. It would have been impossible to ignore me. Of course, Rachel Notley could have made the decision just not to answer me. But to her credit, she did answer me. We have seen other cases where, for example, Calgary Mayor Jody Gondik just decided not to answer a question from the Countersignal editor-in-chief, Cian Bexte, and actually walked away from the podium when he asked her a question. So to her credit, Rachel Notley did answer my question, and I got a follow-up in. And then at future press conferences, they've simply just decided to give me the mic, so I've been able to get my questions in on those rare occasions when I actually am able to find out where the NDP press conferences are happening. They've made it very difficult, and they've kept their location very secret from independent media, so we often don't know what's going on or where to find them. But I've been the only independent media reporter that's had success at getting my questions in. Western Standard is barred from asking questions until they apologize for a column that they published, which they're not going to do, let's be honest. The NDP said that the column in question was homophobic and hateful and all that types of things. So they're waiting for an apology. Rebel News hasn't been able to get their questions in, and on the chance that Cian Bexte shows up to something like happened on Monday, the NDP actually tried to get him to leave, and when he wouldn't leave, they called the police on him and had him sort of escorted from the premises. So it's been sort of all over the place on how they're dealing with independent media, but it's kind of just created more drama than is necessary.
We actually, on the Bexte issue, we actually have a clip, I believe, that we can show. Let's roll that now. Now, just to add a little bit to that, he was not actually handcuffed. I'll take it up with Cian about why his hands happen to be in the position they would be if he were handcuffed. But a mainstream media reporter, to their credit, did actually ask Rachel Notley about this incident, which had ended up delaying the start of the press conference by a considerable amount. And she wouldn't take Cian's question, but she took this question about Cian.
Well, you know, it really depends. So I'm happy to present myself to everybody in the media, and even those that come from a very conservative background and have a very pointed perspective in terms of the questions that they ask. There is one media outlet that fits that description that I've been very clear. We will not take questions from until they retract the hate speech. that they published with respect to one of our caucus members. The protester today does not fit that description. The protester today is a protester, has a record of acting like a protester, regardless of what he may or may not call himself, and has a clear association with white supremacist groups. And so the answer is no. No.
Yeah, that was a pretty pointed comment there, calling Keean a protester repeatedly, likening him with white supremacy without offering support for that. But, I mean, the NDP have dug their line in the sand here. And I think, generally speaking, the mainstream media, in my experience, are happy enough to keep their access group small so they don't actually make us think about this. And that, I mean, this is something you and I have talked about, William. It's why independent media is so important, because a lot of the times there are, to borrow Pierre Poilievre's words, these gatekeepers in the mainstream media that really like being the only ones that have access.
No, you're completely right. It's a very clubby environment within the legacy media, and they really don't like it when outsiders try and rock the boat. And, but the need for independent media has never been more clear. If you simply look at their coverage of politics this week, they have written endlessly about the fact that this one UCP candidate made an inappropriate and unpleasant analogy about transgenderism policy in schools. They've talked incessantly about an ethics report that came out today that partly cleared Danielle Smith in the issue related to judicial interference. But what they've barely talked about at all is the NDP's platform, which is calling for a nearly 40% increase in business taxes. And that is an issue that actually will impact the lives of thousands of Albertans, not least of which the nearly 35,000 Albertans who, according to economist Jack Mintz, will likely lose their jobs if the NDP tax policy is adopted after the election. So I think the legacy media tend to focus on their little pet issues. They like to play the inside politics game. They like to be in the little bubble of analyzing poll results or talking about, this little pet issue that happened here or there. And they've really failed at talking about the issues which matter to Albertans, and that's jobs, taxes, cost of living, housing, all of those issues, it's during an election, of course, which is when we should be having important conversations about things like that, not which candidate for which party once said something crazy on their social media, either, a week ago, a year ago, a decade ago.
Yeah. No, you're very right. And by the way, are you a bit thirsty, William? You look thirsty.
Oh, well, you know, that's a really interesting thing you say. I am kind of thirsty. I'm just going to take a little sip here from my True North mug.
I happen to have one too, a True North mug. Rachel doesn't,
What?
but we'll get
you guys,
her one.
that's a really nice mug. How come I don't have one, and how can I get one?
Well, Rachel, it's funny you mentioned that. You actually do have one. You just forgot to pack it, I think, as you went out on the campaign. There we go. You can hear. They took me off while I was doing the pitch. Darn it, Sean, I was trying to sell mugs here. No, we aren't actually selling them, but we do have a few of them in stock, and the first 5 people to donate $150 will get their very own True North mug. And if you donate $500, you get the one that William is sipping from right now. But he won't even wash it. No. First 5 get First 5 to donate $150 get a True North mug. These are very, very limited inventory, and they are. I mean, they're very hefty. Like, you could fit like 2 whole cups of coffee in here, which is how I am getting through the show. And by the way, we did actually give Rachel a mug. You have one, right, Rachel?
I do have one. I just didn't pack it. It didn't seem essential for the campaign trail, and I regret that now. Also, yeah. I believe you can fit like half a glass of wine in them. Someone told me that, so
yeah,
I don't know what you're drinking coffee
people
for,
think it's me because I did the whole like drinking wine bit on my show to spite the World Health Organization the other day, but I have not emptied half a bottle of wine into my mug. I am drinking pure coffee right now.
I did actually see that bit. I know that you accused me of not watching your show, but I did see the wine bit. So,
well, no, I accuse you because you like saw the intro and you're like, "Oh wow, this is great. I've never seen this before." I like, well, we use it in front of every single Andrew Lawton show. So, But if you watch the archive version, you might not see the live countdown. So I will let you slide on that one. But I do just, before we get back into the really important stuff, not that William drinking from a giant True North mug isn't important, we do not get to do the stuff we do without the support of True North Nation out there. And whether it's the people that give, $2 a month or $10 a month or one-time donations of, in some cases, thousands of dollars, we so appreciate it. And I remember when True North started, and I was one of a very small team that we did a lot of work. We punched above our weight. But having Rachel in Alberta able to cover this election full time has been fantastic. And I think, having a team that's spread across the country that lets us cover these stories. And like you were just saying, William, that lets us cover the issues that matter. Like I remember when I was on the 2021 federal campaign trail, and I'm at these press conferences with Aaron O'Toole, which, whatever you think about him, was the conservative leader running in an election with a conservative-ish platform. And, you'd line up behind media that are asking about, things that have nothing to do with the election, nothing to do with the platform. And sometimes you'd go there and you'd say, hi, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask it, but I actually have a question about policy. And it was like you were doing this radical thing. So, the trivia, the anomalies, they matter in elections, but there's a dearth of people covering conservative politicians in a way that matters to a lot of Canadians, I think.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, if public safety, you are seeing a very wide split between where these two candidates stand. And voters really have to know that who they vote for in an election will determine what happens in their everyday lives. If you elect a party, for example, that's going to hike your business taxes, that could lead to widespread layoffs and a loss of investment. You could lose your job. Or if you vote for a party that's going to cut your taxes, you're going to have more money in your pocket when it comes to tax time. So the fact that the legacy media want to obsess about their little cadre of pet issues, fine. But I think it shows more than ever why we need groups like True North, why we need independent media talking about the issues which actually matter to everyday people.
Let's talk about the healthcare aspect here, which was obviously a big part of Danielle's leadership campaign and has, I think, become pretty central to the general election campaign as well. What's been the main healthcare debate, Rachel?
Well, the main healthcare debate is, of course, basically what we're seeing across the country, and that is just the immense wait times people are experiencing when they're at the emergency room, if they need a surgery, or if they need an ambulance. Now, of course, as a Canadian, you pay a ton of money to taxes. We have a publicly funded healthcare system. And so I think it's reasonable to expect that if you need an ambulance, you're going to be able to get one in a reasonable amount of time, just a couple of minutes if you live in the city. Maybe you're going to wait a little longer if you live a little farther away from the city. These wait times have been just immense. They've been growing over the past couple of years, and they've really hit a breaking point. And people all across the board are feeling the effects of this. And the other main problem is that there's a huge shortage of family doctors right now, which is further impacting our hospital systems because people that don't have family doctors are going to the ER to get access to see a doctor because they really don't have a lot of options. And so that's been one of the main issues that Danielle Smith approached during the United Conservative Party leadership race. She said we need to overhaul our healthcare system. And she immediately got started on that once she was elected premier. She wiped the Alberta Health Services Board, whom she was very critical of during the COVID-19 pandemic. She said there was a lot of government overreach responsible and she didn't like their decisions. She replaced them with one administrator and immediately got work to laying out a plan to essentially reduce some of those wait times. Interestingly, just a couple of weeks ago, some new Alberta Health Services data was released showing that wait times for ambulances are way down from what they were back in November. And the 6 months since Danielle Smith has been premier, it looks like her plan is working. Even people in the mainstream media, were forced to kind of admit, oh, maybe Danielle Smith is right that her plan is working and it's going to take a bit more time. So we're seeing her promising to continue those actions and continue to increase healthcare capacity. The government has also taken use of surgical charter centers to basically pay them to get rid of some of the surgical backlog. And then what we're seeing from the NDP is just a lot of complaints, concerns about privatizing healthcare. They don't like the surgical system. They say it's taking jobs away from the hospitals. They're saying that Danielle Smith is planning to sell the hospitals, things like that. Very inflammatory language. They've also pulled some of her old clips, and they're basically saying, oh, she's going to make you pay to see a family doctor because, Danielle Smith was a podcast host for years. She's discussed a lot of ideas, and they're basically trying to make her run against her record of being basically a talk show host who was open to discussion and debate, which has been very difficult for her to sort of surpass that. And she's kind of said repeatedly, I will not charge you to see a family doctor, but that's just an NDP talking point. So, they've also come out and promised to increase capacity for doctors. They said they're going to undertake the largest hiring spree in Alberta history to really increase that capacity of doctors and to fix some of these wait times. So everyone is kind of admitting what the problem is. There's just slightly different solutions as to how they're going to approach it. And then, of course, the NDP not really being genuine or honest about what Danielle Smith's plan actually is another big problem that we're seeing.
You just had like the perfect setup on the clip there, but I can set up your clip for you because you actually asked Rachel Notley about that, about her claim that Danielle Smith was going to make people pay to see their doctor.
Later at the press conference, Danielle Smith said she thinks the protest emerged not from UCP mixed messaging, but rather NDP lies. She said repeatedly she's not going to charge for a visit to the doctor, or she's not going to privatize healthcare. I'm wondering what your response to that. Obviously, the NDP have been reiterating claims that you will have to pay for a family doctor, even while the Premier is saying no, that's not the case.
Here's the thing. Danielle Smith has been seen on film not once, not twice, not sort of in response to some unexpected question, but she has done radio shows, she's done speaking tours, she's written papers, she has recorded herself over and over and over saying these things, advocating to get people to pay more out of pocket for their health care, and talking in great detail about how she saw the sale of hospitals as a completely legitimate way to get around the Canada Health Act. So she's actually been defending her claim that she won't move forward on these things that she's advocated for so much of her life until very, very recently, by saying that she's barred by the Canada Health Act. But when it comes to the sales of hospitals, in the recording, she's actually describing that as something that can be done within the Canada Health Act. So it is a very troubling revelation, and honestly, because she's flip-flopped on so many other things, Albertans don't have a high level of trust that they can count on her to protect our healthcare.
Rachel, what did we just see there?
Yeah, so basically this was at an NDP rally up in Northwest Calgary. I went to it and I asked Rachel Notley, why are you repeating these claims that Danielle Smith is going to charge people to visit their family doctors? Because Danielle Smith has said repeatedly, I think every single media appearance she's given on the campaign trail, she said, I will not charge you to visit your family doctor. And of course, you heard Rachel Notley's answers there. She said, well, she's discussed it so many times and we just can't trust her and we don't know what she's going to do. So I'm going to take her at her word when she discussed these ideas, and basically just trying to sow doubt into Danielle Smith and into her promises not to charge Albertans for a visit to the family doctor.
This may be bad political advice, but there's a part of me that wonders if Danielle Smith would be better off leaning into it, because she is an ideas person. And I mean, when you host a radio show and you have the mind that Danielle Smith has, I mean, she's always liked thinking about different solutions to problems, and she's never shied away from complex solutions. And I know in healthcare, she's put forward some very novel ideas on healthcare. And it was actually disappointing to not see her lean more into that, because she has talked about the need for a fundamental restructuring in healthcare, and she's talked about it in a very sensible way. She's talked to experts about it, and that's been the one thing that I think has felt a little inauthentic, is that she's running away because of the political climate on healthcare, which I understand, but she's running away from what I think she's made pretty clear in the past that she believes. What do you think, William?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's no secret that in her heart, Danielle Smith thinks we need major structural reform to our healthcare system. And I don't think she's wrong. I think if you read any of the reports that have come out about publicly funded healthcare, the fact that with people living longer lives, the fact that medical procedures are becoming increasingly expensive, the equipment costs, the medication costs, all of this is leading to a point where we're going to get to where there's just simply too much demand on the system in order to be able to deliver it. And at that point, we will hit a crisis. We will be in an actual crisis where we cannot deliver healthcare to the people who need it. So, for all that Rachel Notley pretends to be the guardian of the working people, she doesn't seem to care at all that a huge number of them could find themselves without an effective healthcare system if we don't try and change it now. And the time to change it is before we reach that crisis point. There's lots of things out there, having a public system partnered with a private system, looking at examples of how they do it in the United Kingdom, Japan, Western Europe. The biggest fallacy in healthcare, of course, is that there's only two ways to deliver it. How we do it in Canada right now or how they do it in the United States. And, the fear-mongering is, well, we don't want that U.S. Style healthcare. But the fact is that people have, Western rich countries have grappled with this for years, and they've come up with different solutions. And I would say if anyone is prepared to bite the bullet on changing it, it would be Danielle Smith. And I hope she runs with it if and when she wins the election and actually does implement a fairly aggressive reform agenda when it comes to healthcare.
Yeah, like one of the ones that I remember from the leadership race was healthcare spending accounts. And her argument was quite sound. She said, Alberta Health Services employees have this flexibility in their healthcare spending. Why do Alberta residents not have that? But that never really made it into the general election platform, did it, Rachel?
It didn't make it into the general election platform. UCP has been hosting these evening broadcasts to kind of do a campaign rundown. They have different UCP candidates on the show every evening. I'm sure a lot of our viewers have watched maybe a bit of it here and there. I myself have tried to catch it when I can. She was asked about her plans for a health spending account at one point, and Danielle said it was something that she was still open to, something that she would revisit after the election. It was surprisingly considered as pretty controversial when she first talked about it during the United Conservative Party leadership race. For anyone that has insurance, a lot of times you'll have maybe $300 or $400 on your health spending account. It's quite wonderful. You can use it for a lot of different things. You can use it to go to the naturopath or to go for a massage therapist, and most benefits have a limit as to how much you can spend per year. So once you use up those benefits, you could use your health spending account to apply to something like that. Or usually for a dentist, your dentist your insurance might cover 75% of your appointment. You pay for the rest out of pocket. You could use your health spending account to cover that remaining bit to have it fully covered. So they're usually quite flexible with what you can do for them. Very useful. You can try different things. I don't know why it was considered so controversial. It's actually a really great idea. I would love to have a health spending account again. So she did say she was still open to it. I think once it's introduced and people understand what it is a little bit better, people will find it very useful. And sure, $300, which was the amount I think she was initially discussing, isn't a lot of money. You're not going to get a lot of appointments out of that, maybe 3.5 appointments, maybe 4, depending on what you're going to use it for. But it's still just something to try it out. She kind of introduced it as something that the government would try and see if people like it, which I suspect they would when they see how flexible it is and all the different things that you can use it for.
If you are just tuning in, or if you've been tuning in for a while and have forgotten what we're doing here, it is the night of the first and only leaders debate of the Alberta election. I'm Andrew Lawton, joined by Rachel Emmanuel and William McBeth. True North is going to be carrying the debate live when it starts in just over 15 minutes time. Now, it might not be starting right at 6 o'clock Mountain Time. There might be a bit of delay while they, to explain the rules and all that, but we'll be throwing to it as soon as it commences, and we'll have a bit of a post-show analysis. We'll have some highlights and lowlights and midlights and headlights and all of these other things. But I do want to just say, if you have not yet donated, the first 5 people to donate more than $150 tonight will get a True North mug, hot off the presses. William is modeling it, and if you include a request, the first donor might actually get William included with the mug. We're still working out the shipping arrangements. I think he's local to Alberta, so it might be easier if you're an Alberta donor. Actually, we haven't gotten 5 yet. I just checked with our website guy. We still have at least a couple left, so you can get in on that by going to donate.tnc.news, donate.tnc.news, and we also have had some super chats. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can chip in a donation in the comment section. If you have a question, we will even answer it on air. And let me just go to one question that I got. This wasn't a super chat, but I thought it was an interesting question. So interesting that I've now lost it on my screen, so I don't have the name of the person who asked it handy. But they were asking, oh, here it is. They were asking, Bitbaldi on Twitter has asked about the Alberta Party. And I know you were talking, William, about the consolidation of the left in Alberta into the NDP. But this is someone who's saying they are a conservative who is disappointed with the cons and what they're calling Danielle's coup. And this person says, I miss the Alberta Party. So it was the Alberta Party, when it was a thing, in so much as it ever was, pulling conservative votes? Because I always saw it as kind of like a big L liberal alternative.
Gosh, there has been no political party in Alberta political history that has been more things to more people than the Alberta Party. Now, when it first started, it was actually to the right of where Wild Rose was. It was organized by a lot of old school Reform Party people, and they wanted it to be this really quite a right-wing populist party. And but of course, eventually what happened, there was an AGM, and suddenly it was taken over by a bunch of people who wanted the name, that Alberta party name, and it became a centrist party. It became a party that actually was home to disaffected ex-PC Alberta people who didn't like going with Jason Kenney and the new United Conservative Party. So it ended up there. And then it sort of languished. You know, they had a leader who did quite well for them. He was based out of Calgary. He was an entrepreneur, worked in the tech sector. And then one afternoon, they just decided to get rid of him. They got rid of him. They replaced him with former Edmonton Mayor Stephen Mandel. And the party went from having a couple seats in the legislature to losing all of their seats in the next election. And since then, I think they've just really struggled to figure out who it is and what they are. So don't know what they stand for. They have a great name. Who wouldn't want to vote for the Alberta Party? You know, right next door, there's a Saskatchewan party that is very popular. But they seem to really have had identity crises. Couldn't figure out who they are, what they stand for. And if you ask me now, I couldn't tell you what they believe in.
Yeah, I couldn't even tell you the leader. I remember one of my old radio colleagues in Alberta stepped down and ended up running for the Alberta Party, Angela Kokott. And at the time, I was like, well, now I'm even more confused about what you believe, because I couldn't quite figure out what the Alberta Party believed at that particular moment. But I think there's an interesting dynamic in Alberta politics. And I've often looked at Alberta through the COVID era. And I know that we've moved beyond that largely. But one of the interesting things is that when Alberta under Jason Kenney went down the road of COVID restrictions, lockdowns, vaccine passports, there was a really significant wave of concern, I think, in the conservative libertarian movement in Canada, that if Alberta can't be the holdout, there's really no hope. And Danielle Smith was a correction. I mean, some people who don't like her might say an overcorrection to that. And I know that the NDP's narrative has been to try to paint her as crazy Danielle who believes these crazy things. But to be honest, I don't know if that lands with people. I think there are a lot of people, when they see her and talk to her, that seemed, even if they don't like what she argues with, don't actually see the evil caricature. And I'm wondering, Rachel, you've seen Danielle Smith in action on the campaign trail. Like, what's been the reception she gets when you move beyond the attack ads and the headlines?
I have to say that I think the Alberta NDP's bid to paint Danielle Smith as someone you can't trust, to be unsure about, has been pretty effective, especially with those moderates and swing ridings. I think people are really deciding how they feel about her. I think that is really going to be the ballot box question. However, when it comes to what we were talking about a little bit of the digging up old comments from candidates and trying to just throw everything out there that you can and see what sticks, I don't think that has been super effective. I think the NDP has spent far too much time on negative campaigning and just sort of these attack ads, and not really focused on their own plans, on their vision that they're going to put forward for Alberta. So I would say that some of that hasn't really landed, and I think we've seen the UCP has been able to still get their message out about jobs and the economy, about healthcare, and especially about public safety. So I do think that is something Danielle Smith is going to have to face going to the election. People still think of her back in the Wild Rose days as being fairly crazy. They really were unhappy about the floor crossing. Most Albertans have forgiven her for that, but it's still something kind of there in the back of your mind. So I think that campaigning on the part of the NDP has been fairly effective. I just don't know if it's enough to outweigh what really should be a positive vision they have for the province. That's how people should campaign, is showing a vision for how they're going to make things better and what the province would look like under their government.
So we are just about 10 minutes away from the scheduled start time of the debate. Let's turn a little bit to debate predictions, debate strategy. Well, first off, do we know much about the specific format?
No, I don't think we do. We do know, of course, that it'll be a leader-to-leader matchup, and therefore you won't have what you have in a lot of other elections, which is going to leaders who either will elect very few or no people in an election. I'm assuming that means almost every question will be answered by both leaders and possibly with an opportunity to respond. There are some things I do think, though, that you can look for, which is which leader is doing the better job of connecting with people through the medium of television. And there's a few tactics to this. Are they looking right into the camera? When they answer their question, are they looking into the camera and making sure they're talking to people? Are they distracted by their opponent and addressing their comments to them? And I think the winner is whoever comes across as the most reasonable, calm, measured, sensible, ready to govern person. I think if anybody flies off the handle, they're the ones who are going to lose. And my money is that Rachel Notley is more likely to become upset and animated over the course of the debate than Danielle Smith.
Do you, well, I'll put this to either of you. I mean, do either of you anticipate either one really going for the jugular and going to engage with the opponent, or do you think they're going to mostly talk to the audience and talk to the moderators instead of talking to the other?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Andrew. I'm not super sure what to anticipate there. I don't really see Danielle Smith going for the jugular. She's just not really that type of person. And I think during the leadership race, we saw that even when people made very personal attacks against her, as did happen with a couple of candidates, interestingly, some of who were cabinet ministers in her government, she kept it pretty professional. She kept it pretty straight down the line, and she was really able to maintain her calm. You know, while Rachel Notley and Danielle Smith have both been public figures for such a long time, Danielle Smith had years of practice on the radio. That is really good, concrete experience to be going into politics with, to be facing crowds. She did it for years. She talked to all sorts of different people, was able to continue all sorts of discussions and debates with people and keep the conversations flowing in a way that was effective for the viewers and the listeners. So she has a lot of really good experience under her belt working in that medium. Rachel Notley obviously has a lot of experience as a politician. I saw her recently at a rally. She was able to excite the crowd and, draw in a good energy and really excite people. But, she also really likes to lie about Danielle Smith and throw attacks against her. So I think it'll be hard for her to all of a sudden pull back from that method, especially when so much of the Alberta NDP's campaigning has been about these slurs against Danielle Smith and about manipulating the UCP's campaign messaging into something that it was never really meant to be, and honestly just lying about it. So I don't really see how Rachel Notley could avoid going for the jugular when the whole NDP campaign has kind of been about going for Danielle Smith's jugular.
Go ahead, William.
Sorry. I would say, too, that I think it's going to be interesting because Danielle Smith does have a couple weaknesses. One of her weaknesses that I have noticed is she has a very big focus on wanting to answer the question she's specifically being asked.
You can tell you're a former political staffer if you think that's a weakness.
Well, this is true. It's my old life shining through into, because I'm sure journalists, of course, would prefer their elected officials to answer the specific question that is being put to them. But one of the keys for success is moving off the specific question you're being asked and talking about the issues you want to talk about during a campaign. And I think for Danielle Smith, it's about the New Democrat economic record, tying Rachel Notley to the federal Singh-Trudeau coalition on the left, and basically saying we are going to stall Alberta's economic growth and recovery if we give these people another term in office. But if she's pushed into the weeds by the journalists asking her the questions or in always responding to Rachel Notley, she might end up not being able to do that over the course of the night. And if they're successful in keeping her from talking about her message, then I think that's how Rachel Notley will come out ahead in the debate.
I may have miscalculated when I said that we would read questions that people share in super chats on YouTube, because the first is someone who wants Rachel to marry him. So take from that what you will. But thank you for your contribution, JR.
Married.
She's taken. The first guy that you missed. There's a guy who got her asked a question earlier tonight in the super chat. Then we have a question from Jim Ross here, who says Rachel Notley is sort of like Justin Trudeau. She's basically just Grant's daughter who has a legacy name. Dad never challenged any government, and if it hadn't been for the PC self-destructing, the NDP wouldn't have been elected. Obviously, as our Alberta political historian, I'm going to go to you on this, William, but I think I would say, I mean, sure, has she just been trading off of the family? And I would say beyond that, has Rachel Notley actually carved out a pretty positive name for herself in Alberta politics?
I would say she's absolutely built a bigger base of support than her party has ever enjoyed in Alberta before. I mean, if you look back in the 2012 election, for example, the NDP were nowhere. They would elect the same 4 or 5 seats in Edmonton in an election, and that was it. So the fact that they've gone from that to being a serious contender is probably a credit to the work Rachel Notley has done, ditching some of the more extreme or out of or un-Albertan elements of her party's platform, taking a much softer approach on oil and gas, for example, being much more pro-business. But all of that being said, I do think, especially in Calgary, which is where this election will be won and lost, there is a real concern that the 4 years that had Rachel Notley as premier were terrible years for Calgary. There were high job losses. There were a lot of people out of work. It was tough times. And not all of that was Rachel Notley's fault, of course. You know, energy prices were very low. Alberta, in the first part of 2015, was tipping into really tough economic times. But certainly, I would say Rachel Notley's policies did not help during that time. She did do several things that made people concerned to invest here. Now, the question is, are Calgarians going to overlook that? Are Calgarians going to forgive her or say, oh, she was just a victim of circumstance? Or are they going to say, no, the last time we had an NDP premier, it was bad in this city. We're not going back down that road, even if I don't love Danielle Smith, even if I don't think she aligns with me on every one of my issues or values. Do I believe that a Danielle Smith conservative government will be better for me and my family than a Notley government?
Yeah, and I think that this is where the contrast that I hope comes out tonight really resonates with people. Because oftentimes, I mean, when you look at federal debates, for example, that have the Bloc Québécois, which is literally only winning in one province, and the Liberals and the Conservatives and the NDPs, which are politically relevant, but only in a marginal third-party sense, and then you get the Green Party, and in 2019 you had the PPC, which didn't win a seat. Like, it's everyone is scrambling to just get screen time and to be known, and you get these like weird pairings where, you know, Elizabeth May is getting to go one-on-one with Justin Trudeau, when, you know, whatever you think of either, they're really not equivalent in relevance. So the idea of two people that are of equal stature in politics, both of them have a conceivable shot at victory here. There is really no excuse to not challenge each other on the records and on the policies, and to really force, if the format allows, some accountability for positions and records.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd be interested to know Rachel's thoughts on this too. But I would say, in the case of Danielle Smith, she really has to try and put forward the most optimistic vision of Alberta she can. I think if it becomes all gloom and doom, that's worse for Danielle than it is for Rachel. And I think because, you know, Danielle's in government and Rachel's in opposition. Opposition always has to paint a more dire gloom and doom scenario than government. And, I once told Danielle that if there was a premier I thought she should emulate in temperament and in behavior, I said Christy Clark, who, while what you would think of her policies notwithstanding, she was a formidable campaigner. She bounded off her campaign bus, smiling, waving, shaking hands, looking like this was the happiest she's ever been in her whole life that day. So I would say, look, you want to see a happy, happy warrior, Danielle, who's excited about the future of Alberta. And I think if she does that, it's going to paint a great contrast to Rachel Notley, who's going to try and say everything's terrible, when the reality on the ground is everything isn't terrible. Alberta's doing quite well right now. Ontarians, my good, people like you, Andrew, are moving here in unprecedented numbers for our cheap housing and job opportunities. So anybody who thinks that times are bad in Alberta hasn't walked out their front door lately.
I will say last time, so people in Ontario have seen by now the advertisements for Alberta is Calling, where they are basically running ads on the Toronto subways and radio stations and in London, Ontario and Hamilton, trying to get people to move to Alberta. And the last time I saw Danielle Smith was actually at a fundraising dinner in Toronto, and she gave me the Alberta is Calling pitch personally. And I was with my wife, and I said, she's the one you've got to convince. But it's actually been quite brilliant. And Alberta is seeing a resurgence that really looked like it was lost for many years. Like I remember when we produced our documentary on years ago with Calgary in Crisis, and we looked at the drug and homelessness issue, downtown vacancy, and it hasn't entirely rebounded to the glory days. But Rachel, there is, basically my sense there is that it's all upside for people.
Close to all upside. I'm going to have to push back on you just a little bit, William, as someone who just finally found a place in Calgary. The Alberta is Calling campaign is working far too effectively. Please stop moving here. There's no housing for you. Those of us who do live here can't find
Sorry,
affordable
we're going to have to
housing.
cut you off there, Rachel, not because we're fact-checking you, but because the leaders' debate is commencing. We can go to it live right now.
And Judy Aldis from CBC Alberta.
Now, we have three main topics to cover tonight: affordability, healthcare, and the economy, which, according to our polling, are the top issues for Albertans. We also have a fourth wildcard round. In addition, both CTV and Global News have been solicited questions from you, the voters. We've gotten hundreds of submissions and pared them down to two. Aaron and I will put those questions to the leaders.
And there are some rules tonight, and here they are. Both parties have agreed to all of these rules for tonight's debate. Each leader will have 1 minute to make their opening remarks. Over the course of the hour, 10 questions are expected. Each will be directed at a specific leader, who then has 45 seconds to respond. The other leader will have time for a rebuttal, followed by free debate.
And there will be an all-important countdown clock that the leaders can see here in studio, with 30 seconds left in their answer, so they know when it is time to wrap up. And as we near the end of the debate, each leader will have time to make their closing remarks to Albertans.
Well, the speaking order tonight was determined by a random draw, and a reminder to Ms. Smith and Ms. Notley not to talk over one another. We want to ensure that the discussion can be heard clearly for our audience at home, and we're not going to hesitate to step in to ensure that that is the case.
All right, it is time to get started. First up tonight, Danielle Smith from the UCP with her opening remarks. Ms. Smith, you have 1 minute.
Good evening. Elections are about making important choices for you and your family. This election, Albertans have a choice between a UCP government that has lowered taxes, balanced the budget, and returned Alberta to its place as the economic powerhouse of Canada. Or we can choose to go backward with the same failed NDP policies that hiked taxes, drove out jobs and investment, and almost bankrupted our province. We can't afford to go back. We need to go forward. If elected, the UCP will continue to make life more affordable by cutting your personal income taxes and extending the fuel tax holiday. We'll crack down on criminals with more officers on the ground and ankle bracelet monitoring of violent offenders out on bail. And we will continue to invest in healthcare and mental health addiction treatment while ensuring no Albertan ever has to pay out of pocket to see a family doctor. Alberta's opportunities are endless, and I know our best days are still ahead. Thank you, and I look forward to the debate.
Ms. Smith, thank you so much. The floor is now yours, Ms. Notley, for your opening remarks.
To begin, I want to thank our firefighters and say that my thoughts are with those Albertans who are out of their homes right now. Tonight, I want to talk about a better future for Alberta, where we fix healthcare, lower household costs, and create jobs. This election is about trust, and it's about leadership. You know you can't trust Danielle Smith, so my offer to you is this. I will work every day to be the premier you deserve, creating jobs and diversifying for the future. I won't raise your taxes. I will cap your bills. I won't fund a war room. I will fund an emergency room. And I won't ever make you pay to see a doctor. I'll protect our health care, protect our mountains, and protect your pension. And having learned today that Danielle Smith broke the law, I will also protect our law, and I will never break it. When I say something, I mean it, and that's the difference between Danielle and me.
Ms. Notley, thank you for your opening remarks. Well, affordability, rising interest rates, and inflation have been top of mind. Big issue for a lot of Alberta families struggling to make ends meet.
The first series of questions tonight are based on that issue, and question number 1 goes to Lisa Johnson from Post Media.
Thank you. This first question is for UCP leader Danielle Smith. We've been dealing with an affordability crisis for over a year. We have seen temporary measures put in place, including rebates and affordability payments, which are only applied to some Albertans. What will you do to support all Albertans with the rising cost of living as inflation continues to have a real impact?
One of the first things that we knew we needed to do was address the inflation crisis created, let's be fair, by the Liberal NDP coalition in Ottawa, spending too much money, driving up the cost of everything. And there's only so much we can do here. So we gave $600 affordability payments. We gave a rebate on fuel taxes to offset the federal carbon tax. And we also made sure that we were going to put on electricity rebates so that people paid less on their power bills. What we have to do going forward is more than that. We know we're going to continue to see an increase in the federal carbon tax. That's why we're going to offer an 8% personal income tax rate. It brings us pretty much in alignment with Alberta or with Ontario and British Columbia. It'll give $1,500 per family, and we'll also extend that fuel tax rebate until the end of the year.
Okay, Ms. Smith, thank you. The same question to you, Ms. Notley.
Well, thank you. You know, under the UCP, the fact is that most Albertans' utility bills look more like a mortgage payment. And your insurance costs for your car, well, that looks more like what you save up for your whole summer vacation. Now, those costs were under control when we were in government because we had put caps in place to protect Alberta families. Unfortunately, the UCP chose to remove them, and now costs are spiraling. So we're going to help. We're going to put a cap back on car insurance, not a pretend one like Danielle Smith did a couple months ago, but a real one. And we're going to help families reduce their utilities. And most importantly, we will never, ever, ever make them pay to see a family doctor.
All right, Ms. Notley, thank you. We're going to open it up to the first free debate on this issue tonight, starting with Ms. Smith.
And a UCP government will never, ever make you pay for a family doctor either. What we also won't do is cause an increase in your power bills. Ms. Notley is not taking responsibility for the fact that she created the power bill crisis. At the time, Alberta Party leaders said it was the biggest mistake of the NDP government because of their ideological changes. By phasing out coal early, they added $2 billion to the cost of your power bill. And as a result, we're seeing the consequences of that today, and she's not stopped. She's going to achieve, she wants to achieve the 2035 net zero target put forward by Justin Trudeau. That'll cost $52 billion and increase your power bill another 40%. We can't afford to do that.
Well, you know, here's the thing. We actually put a cap in place, and we did that so that people's utilities and their electricity would get out of control. And it got out of control when the UCP remove the cap. But let's talk about something else, though. Let's talk about healthcare costs as they impact affordability. You claim that you won't raise costs. But Danielle, you know, I've known you for at least a decade, perhaps more, and I've watched your career, and you have argued passionately in multiple settings for your belief that you care about passionately, those were your words, making people pay more for their health care. So my question to you is, why are you not running on the thing that you believe? Why are you not being honest with Albertans? Why aren't you making the argument that you think having them pay more is what you want? Because you've said it in video, in papers, in speaking tours, in the legislature for over a decade.
Ms. Smith, we're going to let you jump in here.
I know Ms. Notley likes to show grainy videos of things I said while I was on radio. And the reason she does that is she doesn't want to run on her record. And the reason she doesn't want to run on her record is it was an absolute disaster. She racked up $70 billion in debt, more debt than any premier, actually all premiers combined in Alberta's provincial history. She talked about deception. Did you remember running on a carbon tax in the last election? I sure didn't. And that increased the cost of everything. We eliminated it, but Justin Trudeau wouldn't let us keep it off. And now Ms. Notley has not stood up to her boss, Jagmeet Singh, in Ottawa, and worked with us to say don't increase that carbon tax any further. And in fact, certainly don't increase it 300%. No one has any credibility talking about affordability as long as they support a carbon tax, which is going to increase the cost of everything.
Ms. Smith, I'm sorry. You talk about grainy videos, but actually we had high definition 18 months ago when those videos of you arguing for people to pay for their health care came out. And you know what? We had high definition when you said you wanted to sell our hospitals across Calgary. And you know what? We had high definition a week ago when your deputy premier said that he thought people should pay to use the emergency room.
We're going to have to leave this right here. We got a lot to get to tonight. We've got to move on.
And our next question comes from Courtney Terrio from City News. Courtney.
Thank you. This question is for NDP leader Rachel Notley. Now, no matter the provider or contract situation, utility costs remain high here in Alberta. Now, I know you both touched on previous policies, but my question is, what can government do to bring down the actual cost of utilities going forward?
Well, that's a very good question. And what we absolutely have to do is find a way to reduce those costs. A lot of Albertans aren't aware that in the pre-election period, the UCP put a cap on what folks are paying for their electricity just for the last 4 months. What they don't know is that, in fact, come June, they're going to have to pay that back. And that's going to cost about half of Alberta families about $200 million. So the first thing that we will do is we will actually have those families' backs, and we won't force them to pay back the cost of Danielle Smith's pre-election attempt at distracting people from what UCP policy has done to their utilities. But then going forward, we have to find a way to keep those costs lower.
All right, Ms. Notley, that's your 45 seconds. A rebuttal to you, Ms. Smith, 45 seconds.
Well, the first thing is that we have to build a power grid based on it being reliable and affordable as opposed to based on ideology. We have a federal government that is propped up by the NDP that has put on war on natural gas. Our power grid here is almost 90% natural gas, and yet we have a federal government that wants us to be able to be completely abated on natural gas by 2035. That is the commitment that Ms. Notley has signed on to. She wants to achieve that. That's going to cost $52 billion and increase our power bills 40%. The other thing that's going to happen is they also want us to phase off completely in their new green building strategy, phase completely off natural gas, which one of the presidents of our large companies has said would cost another $75 billion. That is not the way to get affordable energy for Albertans.
Okay, Ms. Notley, you now have the floor for your rebuttal.
Well, thank you very much. Well, let me just say, first of all, that the numbers that Ms. Smith are throwing around are numbers that have been fully discredited. And they've actually been discredited by the people that the UCP hired to come up with the numbers. Almost the day after they came up with those numbers, the firm came out and said, nope, those weren't right. And in fact, the other report that they were relying on were also deeply flawed. What we know is that there is roughly $16 trillion of international investment floating around out there looking to invest in renewable energy. And if we are going to be forward looking, if we are going to create jobs, if we are going to position our economy for the future, we need to go out there and get that investment. We can't look backwards. We have to plan forwards. That's who Albertans are. Now, when we did the phase out of coal, and we increased renewable energy in Alberta so successfully when we were in government, we controlled utility costs for the sole purpose of making sure consumers didn't pay the cost. And that's exactly what we would do again.
All right, Ms. Smith, shaking your head during much of that. You have the floor.
Well, I know Ms. Notley says she believes in science and she believes in experts, but somehow the expert that the Alberta electric system operator she wants to discredit. But you notice that she didn't disavow the 2035 target for net zero, even though the Saskatchewan NDP did. Saskatchewan NDP voted with Premier Scott Moe saying it is unachievable. If we want to have a realistic plan, a practical plan, we have to fight back against Ottawa. This candidate will not. We have to fight back against Ottawa and make sure that we put a target that's reasonable, realistic, and achievable, and that's carbon neutrality by 2050. That's the policy of our party, and that is the way that we're going to make sure that we maintain reliability, affordability, and that we actually achieve our targets.
We'll get you back in here, Ms. Notley.
Well, you know, Ms. Smith, I know you're keen on fighting. You want to fight with Ottawa. You want to fight with the media. You want to fight, frankly, with your former self. It's actually quite exhausting. Here's what I need Albertans to know. I will always stand up for Alberta. I will always stand up for the interests of Albertans. I did that when I was Premier. I made sure we got a pipeline to Tidewater, the first one in 50 years. I did that standing up against the BC government. I did it standing up with a federal government, and that's my record, and that will also be my blueprint. So, Ms. Smith, you know, I just have to say I disagree with so much of what you had to say there.
One last word to Smith on this topic.
Well, Ms. Notley didn't stand up when Justin Trudeau canceled Northern Gateway. She didn't stand up when Energy East pulled the plug. She didn't stand up when they brought in a tanker ban off the West Coast for our product, and she didn't stand up when the No More Pipelines bill was passed.
Well,
she will not stand up. In fact,
you actually know that's not true. You commented on the fact that submissions to the Senate. You know that that's what I did on both of those issues.
It was too late, and I must tell you, where do you think Justin Trudeau got the idea for just transition and for an emissions cap and for a carbon tax? He got it from Ms. Notley when she was Premier, and she's going to continue to implement these same kind of policies, and she's going to walk in lockstep with Justin Trudeau on making sure that they get implemented, and that's only going to harm our economy.
All right, that is all the time we have for this topic, and in fact, for this portion of the debates.
And when we come back, we will be talking more about healthcare and the economy. Please stay with us.
CPAC brings you Charles R., The Making of a Monarch, an intimate look at the life of Charles over his years as the heir to the throne. Through narration by Charles himself, we learn about his childhood, military service, public life, and family life, shedding light on the real personality of the man behind the crown. Charles R., The Making of a Monarch. See it on CPAC.
Long way from Nashville, and mama, I tell you that. Performed from Montreal to Boston to Los Angeles. But Toronto, that's my chosen home. Sure, when I'm walking down Yonge Street, I see some funny people who have the nerve to point the finger at me. Grin and smile and whisper.
Thank you very much for that. Sorry, we looked at the format and weren't aware they were going to be throwing to commercial break in this. We will return to this once the debate resumes, but let's just check in and get some early reaction there. We get a sense of, I think, what we're probably going to see more of over the rest of the evening. William, any surprises?
No surprises, except that I think earlier I said whoever becomes the most agitated, whoever really loses their cool is going to lose. And so far, Rachel Notley coming across far more agitated than Danielle Smith. I think if you look at that last segment in particular, she almost got choked up on her unhappiness about the facts that Danielle was putting forward. To her credit, I think Danielle's debate performance so far has been very solid. And I think in particular, something she hasn't done, but I think she should have, and I'm glad she's now doing, if you are on the conservative side, is linking Rachel Notley to Justin Trudeau and making that connection clear. She did it during the leadership race. She's avoided it in the first part of the campaign, but this debate she's decided to really make that linkage very clear. So first few minutes of this debate, I think so far advantage Danielle Smith.
All right, well, let's get back to it right now in Edmonton.
When I first got elected, I was being told that the AHS system was on the brink of collapse. You had unions saying that we needed to go back to mandates and start masking kids in school. And I said, absolutely not. We are not going back to that. If the problem is AHS, then let's fix AHS. So we talked to doctors and nurses and paramedics on the front line. We listened to them and we implemented their ideas. And guess what? is working. Hospital wait times are down. EMS response times are down. We've effectively ended red alerts for EMS in both of our major cities. Ambulances in rural are staying in rural, and we're reducing surgical wait times. We're going to be able to keep this going. And if we continue at this rate, we will have completely eliminated our surgical backlog by this time next year and be the first province in the country to do so.
And your rebuttal now, Ms. Notley.
Well, I will say Albertans have had enough of driving hundreds of kilometers to get the emergency care, obstetric care, cardiac care, any kind of care that they need. They're tired of looking for doctors. They're tired of 15-hour waits in the emergencies rooms. And they're particularly tired of having the UCP tell them, oh, the problem's fixed. There is no problem. There is a problem. We've put forward a reasonable, practical solution. The answer is to get more Albertans access to a family doctor. By doing that, with our costed plan, we can take the pressure off of our emergency rooms, off of our surgical wait times, off of our ambulances, and we can also make sure that nobody ever, ever, ever has to pay to see a family doctor.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Notley. Once again, let's dive back into the free debate portion where you're free to challenge each other's policies, beginning with Ms. Smith.
You know, I heard of all of the things that Ms. Notley mentioned when I was in politics last time in 2012, and she had 4 years to fix it, and she didn't. She didn't listen to the front line. All she did was continue to build the bureaucracy, and she didn't get to local decision making. She didn't get to local control. We did. We heard from paramedics what they wanted us to do, and it was actually very straightforward. We had to make sure that they had the ability to drop patients off when they arrived on the site so that they can get back out and be there for you when you needed them. And that was a very straightforward idea that came from the front lines. And Ms. Notley had an opportunity to fix healthcare. She didn't. We're beginning on this pathway. We're making great progress, and we need to have another mandate to continue it.
Ms. Notley will get you in on this.
Yes, no, well, quite honestly, as I said before, Albertans are so frustrated when they're told that there isn't a problem and everything has been fixed. The reality is things have gotten considerably worse over the last 4 years. The UCP cut funding dramatically. They ripped up the deal with the doctors. They told nurses that they needed to be laid off. They threatened to lay off 10,000 frontline healthcare workers, and then COVID hit. So, and the result, unfortunately, is we've got whole cities without access to family doctors. We've got just last week we had 15-hour waits in emergency rooms all across Calgary, and we recently, just this year, half as many doctors are accepting new patients. So there is a problem. It's very real, and selling our hospitals and forcing people to pay for private care is not the solution.
Ms. Smith, you want back in? Yeah, go ahead.
Look, we signed a deal with the Alberta Medical Association. Our health minister negotiated that we were going to have 25% of our doctors on an alternative payment system within the next 5 years. And that allows for team practice. It allows for nurse practitioners and LPNs, psychologists and other health practitioners to work together in a team practice so that more access will be given on primary care. We put $2 billion towards this, and we're making great progress. We have more health professionals today than we did when Ms. Notley left office, 8,500 more, in fact, including 700 more doctors. And in April, our plan to recognize credentials is working. We had 1,400 nurses who are now licensed and able to practice in Alberta, more than any time in the previous 3 years. The system is working. We've got much more work to do. We know that, but we've got to continue on the work that we have, because I've got the courage. I've got the courage to talk to the front line, and I've got the courage to be able to implement some of the suggestions that they make. Ms. Notley has demonstrated.
All right, we're just going to leave it at that question because we have another one on health right now.
You bet. Our next question is from Lisa Johnson from Post Media.
There is already a lot of private delivery in our public healthcare system, which has existed under the NDP and UCP governments. What criteria would you apply to determine when expanded private delivery is appropriate? And we'll go to Ms. Notley first, please.
Well, honestly, I mean, at this point, what we would always look at is to get the best care for the greatest number of people in the most efficient and cost-effective way. Now, as you may know, there was a study that came out today, just today, on the success of the Alberta government's surgical care initiative. And what they concluded was that the number of surgeries went down and the cost went up. Now, that's not entirely surprising, because most often when you engage in experimentation with privatization, that's what happens. It's the same thing that's going on with the lab situation in Calgary right now. With the UCP's intention to increase private lab services, we now see Calgarians waiting up to a month to get a simple blood test. It doesn't work. We need to focus on public healthcare.
All right, Ms. Notley, that is your 45 seconds. Ms. Smith, over to you.
We need to have publicly funded health care for both doctors and doctor-run surgical centers. We have 300,000 surgeries being done per year. 60,000 of them are in doctor-run surgical centers that Ms. Notley apparently wants to shut down. She hasn't answered the question about how we would be able to replace those surgeries. And I can tell you what is actually happening, because a lot has changed since November when we started making these changes in healthcare. What has happened, in fact, is that we identified that there were 39,000 people waiting longer than medically recommended. We've been cutting that list down by 3,000 surgeries per month. We're now down to 30,000 people waiting. And as I said, if we continue at this pace, those waits will be completely over by this time next year. And I think that's something to celebrate and continue.
Okay, let's open up the floor now to some free debate. Let's start with you, Ms. Notley.
Well, thank you. I mean, again, I think that we need to understand that there is a very, very serious problem, and we are not a year away from fixing all these problems. Ms. Smith, unfortunately, is playing a bit with the statistics. Last November, we had a COVID wave and a flu wave, and she's now comparing statistics to that period of time. It's a seasonal change that she's trying to convince is turning into a long-term trend, but it's not real. What is real is that this year, or this spring, BC, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba filled all of their residency spots for family doctors. Alberta, for the first time, had 45 vacancies. And then they offered them up again, and there were still vacancies. And we don't have family doctors coming to work here in Alberta. And the reason is because Ms. Smith is doing things like referring to them as tyrants and suggesting that people who follow public health orders are Nazi sympathizers. And these things undermine the ability to attract frontline healthcare professionals. They don't feel respected, and they don't feel that this government is at all focused on science and having their back.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Our doctors, nurses, paramedics, and other health professionals are the heroes of our healthcare system. Everybody knows that. What I find so interesting is that Ms. Notley isn't running at all on her record from when she was premier, because she would have to admit that surgical wait times actually went up for 9 key surgeries. She'd have to admit that she didn't actually have the courage to take on the challenge of reforming healthcare. We're already making progress. Of course, there's much more to do, but I am confident that with a new mandate, we'll be able to continue making this progress. The next step, of course, is building out our primary care system, building out continuing care, and adding more home care so that people can age in place, and making sure that we've got that team practice so that anybody has access to healthcare when they need it.
Ms. Notley, care to respond?
Yes, well, I mean, I think the fundamental problem here is that Albertans are deeply concerned at the notion of a Danielle Smith-led government reforming healthcare in any way, shape, or form. She claims she's guaranteed that nobody will ever pay for a doctor, but, you know, Ms. Smith, I was with you in the legislature in 2014. You stood up and you guaranteed you would never cross the floor. 3 weeks later, you cross the floor. Your understanding of the word guarantee is very different than that of most Albertans. And most people are deeply, deeply troubled at the prospect of you reforming healthcare based on your 15-year record of advocating to make people pay out of pocket.
Okay, we are there out of time for this one issue, but we're going to move on. And economy, definitely something that many Albertans are concerned about as we head forward, given the historic reliance on the oil and gas sector for jobs and government revenue, the world beginning to shift away from petroleum products.
Economy and jobs are the key issue in this portion of the debate. With the first question, here is Courtney Theriault from City News.
Now, both of you have made many promises in this election, committing to billions in new spending. With the price of oil sitting below budget projections at various times this year, and given that volatility, how will you pay for these commitments and stay on budget without steep cuts? That first question going to Ms. Smith.
Well, I must say, I know Aaron in the intro talked about shifting away from petroleum products, and I would say that is the Notley view of the world. That is certainly not my government's view of the world. We believe that we are going to reduce emissions, not that we are going to reduce oil and natural gas. We know that with all of the exciting things that are happening with carbon capture, utilization and storage, and all the green technology, we can continue to have a robust, vibrant oil and natural gas sector for years to come. What we want to do is make sure that we're finding more opportunities for our products, having bitumen be used more for asphalt so it reduces the amount of emissions, having LNG export, which creates a brand new stream of income for us. We know that as long as we keep our energy industry strong, we're going to keep Alberta's economy strong. Ms. Notley won't do that. I will.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Ms. Notley, your rebuttal.
Well, you know, there was actually some elements of what Ms. Smith said that I actually agree with. You know, I want to create jobs producing energy. I want to create jobs upgrading our energy. And I want to create jobs reducing emissions. And reducing emissions is absolutely the focus. It's not about reducing or production. It is about emissions. The difference is that Ms. Smith and her caucus have spent much of their career pitting emissions reduction efforts against economic growth. And when we do that, we fail on both. What we want to do is understand the economic opportunity that comes from investing in emissions reductions, attracting investment from other parts of the world, and growing jobs while ensuring greater markets for our oil and gas.
All right, thank you, Ms. Notley. Let's go back to our free debate format right now on this economic question. Ms. Smith, to you.
Ms. Notley has so many anti-oil and gas candidates, I have lost count, including one who compared it to slavery. And I know he hasn't apologized yet, nor have you, or condemned his comments. What I would say is that when you take a position of increasing business taxes, you're creating a lot of uncertainty in our sector. We took the 12% tax that Ms. Notley had imposed, brought it down to 8%, and look what happened. Year over year, we ended up diversifying our economy, attracting more investment, creating more jobs. More people are coming into this province than ever before, and what a bonus. We now have more corporate income revenue than we have in our history, $6.4 billion. When you reduce taxes, you end up attracting jobs and investment and people. When you increase taxes, you chase it away. She wants to increase taxes again. We can't let her do that.
Ms. Notley.
Well, 2 points there. First of all, I find it deeply ironic that Ms. Smith is talking about uncertainty and its impact on attracting investment. This is a person who, well, started by bringing in the Sovereignty Act, an act that her former finance minister very clearly said was going to chase away investment because it undermined the rule of law. That, of course, was before she was found today to have broken the law in an effort to support the private interests of someone accused of wanting to promote violence against the police. All of that chases away investment because it is such a profound compromise to the rule of law. But also, let me talk for just a moment about the issue of corporate taxes. Here's what we're going to do. We are going to take the lowest corporate taxes in the country and move them to be the lowest corporate taxes in the country. Lower than Scott Moe's, lower than Doug Ford's. And at the same time, we will have the income necessary to rebuild our education, rebuild our post-secondary, and invest appropriately in a stable system of healthcare. And all of that creates and attracts investment.
Back to Ms. Smith.
Ms. Notley, it's you and the CBC who need to apologize for Albertans. You flat out lied for several months saying that I and my office had contact Crown prosecutors. She said that is absolutely not true. And she also confirmed that I did not direct or interfere in any COVID-related cases. I would say that we have increased the amount of investment that has happened in our province. We have a $760 million renewable diesel project announced by Imperial. We have $600 million that came in from McCain's. Our Pathways Oil Sands Group is investing. We have an increase in the amount of drilling rigs. That is not a sign that people have lost confidence in our economy. You know what it is a sign of? That when you stand up to Ottawa and you tell the industry that you're going to stand up for them, they actually increase their amount of confidence and they increase their investment.
Except that we have fewer corporate headquarters in Calgary, in Alberta now than we did before in 2019, before you announced your incredibly spendthrift corporate handout.
All right, that's going to do it for this question. We have another economic question coming right now.
And that's coming from Judy Aldis of CBC.
Thank you. You've both mentioned the desire to reduce emissions. Both of your parties have signaled the desire, in fact, to move towards a net zero future. So, Ms. Notley, we'll start with you. Can you outline for us specific actions that you will take to make sure that that happens?
Well, that's a very good question. So let me first point out, in contrast to what Ms. Smith had said previously, is that I was actually the first political leader in Alberta over a year ago to speak out on behalf of Albertans and point out that the draft emissions targets coming from the federal government were unrealistic. I do, however, believe that we need to come up with a Made in Alberta plan that includes practical, achievable emissions limits, and then we need to find and incent the investment. We have to compete with the U.S. and the Inflation Reduction Act to get that investment, but there's a lot out there, and we have some of that set out in our platform, but there's more to do.
Okay, Ms. Smith, you're up next.
Actually, what Ms. Notley has said is that she believes we need an emissions cap, and it needs to be very close to what the federal government is proposing. The federal government is proposing a 42% emissions cap reduction by 2030, which we know is a de facto production cap. And if we have a production cap, it means that we're going to reduce the overall amount of revenues. She has also confirmed, and not denied it this evening, that she agrees with the federal proposal for a net zero power grid by 2035, which we know will cost $52 billion and increase your electricity bills by 40%. We have seen this newsreel before. It's why she doesn't want to talk about her record. When she came in, increased the corporate tax, brought through a surprise carbon tax, increased personal income taxes, 183,000 jobs were lost in the first couple of years.
Well, let me just say, first of all, when we talk about my record in oil and gas, I think it's kind of hard to forget the big thing, which is the first pipeline to Tidewater in 50 years. That's my record. So that's the first thing. Secondly, your numbers around job losses. I think we need to kind of talk a little bit about that, Danielle. Many experts have reviewed that, and they've said they're absolutely ridiculous. In fact, at the end of our term, we had, after a very difficult recession, we came out about 45,000 jobs ahead. And if we were to use your means of coming up with that 180,000 number, the number of jobs lost under the UCP would be over 250,000. So I think Albertans really deserve leadership that will not try to mislead them, but will actually have conversations based on applicable and relevant facts.
Ms. Smith, back to you.
Sure, I'm happy to use the same measure because if you look at our measure, we have increased our net jobs 136,000 since the UCP got elected. So that's, by my count, I guess, 3 times what Ms. Notley was able to do. And there's a reason for that, is because investor confidence has returned. People know that if you elect a UCP government, you're going to get lower corporate taxes. We're not going to come through with surprise taxes. In fact, we're going to have a tax hike guarantee so that if there is ever a proposal for an increase in carbon tax or personal taxes or sales taxes, it has to be put to the people, because these kinds of policies end up chasing away investment, and it costs average taxpayers and it costs average citizens the most. Ms. Notley won't agree to that, and it's the reason for that is she wants to increase corporate taxes, which are going to, once again, chase out investment just like it did last time.
Don't want to cut you off, but I want to get Ms. Notley in here.
When the UCP announced their multi-billion-dollar corporate handout to corporations, here's what happened. We lost 50,000 jobs, we doubled the deficit, and the economy slowed down. 4 years later, we have fewer corporate headquarters than we started out with. So the fact of the matter is we have lower we will still, under our plan, have lower corporate taxes than Scott Moe, than Doug Ford. But what we'll also have is the money to invest in our education system, something that's been horrifically starved under the UCP, restore funding to our post-secondary, a critical partner in economic growth
Ms.
and
Notley,
diversification.
we're going to have to end this portion of the debate.
All right, up next, our viewer and wildcard questions. We're going to shift gears a little bit. You're watching the Alberta Provincial Leaders Debate. Back in just 2 minutes.
CPAC brings you Charles R., The Making of a Monarch, an intimate look at Charles over his...
We are back. Another little break here in the Alberta Leaders Debate. You're tuned into True North's live coverage featuring, it might be a bit of a stretch. I'm here, Andrew Lawton, and featuring Rachel Emmanuel and William McBeth. Another little check-in on what's been happening in the course of the debate. Let's go to you on this one, Rachel. What's your read? I mean, what's been standing out so far?
Yeah, things are moving pretty quickly, as you would expect, but I have to say that I've noticed that Danielle Smith seems to be taking William's advice. She has kept things very positive. We see her bringing up the positive parts of her government's record, their investment, bringing in jobs, people flooding to the province, as well as the work they've done to bring down healthcare wait times, as we talked a little bit about in the pre-show. So she's coming across as someone who's very excited about the work that our government has done and that she hopes to continue doing. She's smiling a lot. She's keeping it very positive. And Rachel Notley Notley is really on the attack. She's bringing up things about the UCP government that she didn't like. You know, things like Danielle Smith is going to privatize healthcare. You can't trust the premier. So I think we're seeing kind of what William said in the pre-show. We're seeing Danielle Smith keeping it really light, keeping it really positive, looking excited, looking enthusiastic. And Rachel Notley is kind of going for the jugular. She's attacking Danielle Smith and she's attacking the UCP's record. That's what really has stood out to me at this point. And I don't know that I've ever really seen Danielle Smith so positive, so smiley, so upbeat in a public appearance before. And we can see that she's putting a strong emphasis on that in tonight's showing.
Let's go to you, William. Have there been any double take moments or any surprising moments so far for you?
No, I mean, you know, everybody goes into a debate looking for the knockout punch, the "you sir had a choice" moment with Brian Mulroney, but that almost never happens in a debate. I do believe Danielle brought her A game to the debate tonight, though. She is landing a lot of her points.
All right, great point, William. Let's get back to the debate.
The increased enrollment, teacher burnout, increased class sizes, and complexity in Alberta school classrooms. Ms. Smith, we're going to begin with you.
We have had so much disruption in our education system in the last 3 years. One of the first things I wanted to do is restore stability to the learning environment for our kids. We know one of the most difficult things that our young people are facing is social anxiety and mental health. And so that's part of the reason why we now spend more money than we ever have in our history on education. We have invested in complexity funding for classrooms so that school boards can decide what the best use of that is, whether hiring more teachers or having education assistants or other psychologists. And we're going to make sure that we continue to build more schools. We've built or modernized 106 new schools, and we're going to keep on doing that. Under the Notley government, they only built 47 schools.
Okay, Ms. Notley.
So much of that's not true, but let me start with this. I have watched for 4 years with great alarm what the UCP has been doing to our school system. I imagine a 6-year-old child in grade 1 in a class that unfortunately has 28, 29, 31, 32 children in it, and she puts her hand up to get help, and she waits for a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and nobody comes. So she puts it down, and it happens a few more times, and she stops trying. Over the last 4 years, we've had 35,000 net new children enter our schools, and the UCP have not hired a single new teacher. In fact, they fired some, and they also fired about 10,000 educational assistants by tweet. We have a plan to fix this, and I look forward to talking more about it.
All right, Ms. Notley, that is your 45 seconds. Let's go to free debate now. Ms. Smith.
Well, I think that what people might be forgetting is we did have a lot of disruption over the last few years, and that's part of the reason we need to have stability back in our system. I don't think teachers forget, though, that under Ms. Notley, they got no wage increases, 0% year after year. Under UCP government, we gave them a much-deserved 3.75% wage increase. And I think that that's what we're hearing from the front line. They want to be respected, they want to be supported with educational assistance, and they also want to have a little bit of stability so that they have time to deal with the very severe mental health crisis of our kids.
Jump in there, please.
Yeah, there have been profound funding cuts to our education system under the UCP. We now have the most crowded classrooms in the country. That was not the case when we left office, but it is the case now. They, as I said, fired 10,000 educational assistants by tweet on a weekend. They also, in order to cut their budget, they did it on the backs of vulnerable children with disabilities ages 3 to 6 by cutting hundreds of millions of dollars from PUF funding. What that meant is that kids all across our province are falling through the cracks. I've been to schools where teachers and EAs are crying about what they can't get a handle on. So the stress wasn't COVID. The stress is this government. We have a plan to hire 4,000 teachers to try to catch up over the next 4 years, 3,000 more EAs, and to restore PUF funding.
All right, let's get Smith back in there.
Well, I would say that Ms. Notley had the opportunity to address class size, and indeed she put forward a proposal to do exactly that, a proposal that the Auditor General said was so badly implemented they couldn't actually track whether it was successful or not, and didn't actually know where the funding went. We know that the very best people to make the decision about what ought to happen in the classroom are our locally elected school trustees. That's why we're giving more funding for mental health, more funding for complexity, more funding for transportation, making sure that every school district has the funding it needs to make its own decisions about what the best mix in the classroom is so that they can meet the local needs.
All right, that is our time for that. Unfortunately, we have to get to our next viewer question, and here it is.
And this question comes from Alex Hamilton from Edmonton. Alex says, please tell us one specific policy your opponent has put forward that you agree with and why. Ms. Notley.
Well, you know, that's a really good question. And I will say this, and I've said it before, it's actually two. I'm going to go with two. So, very early on in the UCP mandate, it was under the former Premier Jason Kenney, they introduced the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation as a means to expand Indigenous participation in our economy. We like it. We're going to expand it, and we're going to expand the number of opportunities that would qualify for that kind of support with Indigenous communities across the province. Another one was they expanded funding of the film and TV tax credit, and that was a good idea. It's brought more excitement into our industry. We will absolutely maintain that, and we look forward to it.
All right, thanks very much, Ms. Notley. Ms. Smith, once again, specific policies that you agree with for the NDP.
I'm very proud of both of the initiatives that Ms. Notley mentioned. The Indigenous Opportunities Corporation has been so successful, I think, in addressing true economic reconciliation. And the film and TV tax credit brought The Last of Us here, which I think all of us feel pretty excited when we watch that on the big screen. What I think Ms. Notley and I would agree with is that we know that there are a number of doctors who are now wanting to specialize, and I completely understand. A lot of time goes into becoming a doctor, and so we're seeing fewer doctors go into family medicine. And so I think we would both agree that we need to move towards team practice, that we need to make sure that we've got team practices for family doctors to work with nurse practitioners, LPNs, and other health professionals to ensure everybody gets the health care they need without having to pay for it.
Okay, thank you both. It doesn't really lend itself to much free debate, that question, but we're glad that we got that one in there because we really like that one. So let's head to our next question.
And this is a wild card question on a theme that's outside of our main topics.
Here's Lisa Johnson from Post Media.
Thank you. This election may be decided by who Albertans trust more. Ms. Notley, based on the NDP's fiscal record in government, there are some people who don't trust you to manage Alberta's finances. And Ms. Smith, you were found today to have broken conflict of interest rules. Why should Albertans trust you? Ms. Smith, this question goes to you first.
Well, first, what I would say is that when Ms. Notley campaigned last time around, she didn't tell anybody she was going to increase the carbon tax. She brought in a business tax, and she also ended up running up more debt than we've seen of any premier in our province's history. And the results speak for themselves. We saw 183,000 jobs lost in the first couple of years. We had a number of people moving out. We had 13 quarters of people leaving this province. In fact, the energy minister at the time said, well, if you can't find a job in Alberta, go work in BC for a while. That kind of defeatist attitude is not what Alberta is all about. Alberta is back on track. We have more people coming in here than ever before. Our Alberta is Calling campaign is working. We've got more diversification and business investment. We've got to keep that going.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Smith. Ms. Notley, the floor is yours.
First of all, let me say, I guess there's two things. First of all, I was very pleased to roll out a pretty well thought out costing document for our platform. And that document ensures that over 3 years, we would maintain a cumulative surplus of $3.6 billion. That is in contrast to what the UCP hurriedly rushed out today, which would actually very possibly go into deficit in the third year and is considerably smaller surplus than what we're proposing. And so that calls into question many of the items that they're proposing to Albertans. The other thing I would say, I've been in office since 2008. I have never actually breached the conflict of interest legislation. Ms. Smith cannot say the same.
Well, I guess you did have an MLA who hacked our healthcare system. I can tell you.
Do you
that
really want to talk about our candidates and our MLAs?
Well,
like, seriously, I do not think you're going to win that one.
I
That is not one you want to do.
I have to tell you, when putting together our affordability payments, to have to ask whether it was going to be hack-proof from the NDP, that's not something that Ms. Notley should be very proud of. What I will also say is that when she came out with her costing document, it was almost immediately discredited because Todd Hirsch said he hadn't done the analysis on what kind of impact it would have on chasing away investment. Others did. Trevor Tombe did. Jack Mintz did. There are several business reporters who did. The Alberta Chamber of Commerce did. And what they have said is that would create instability. And the instability would chase additional investment out. It would chase jobs out. And we would go back and have a rerun of what we did in the period of time that Ms. Notley doesn't want to talk about, which was when she was Premier.
All right, Ms. Notley obviously has thoughts on this. Back to you.
I do, yes. I mean, obviously, the fact of the matter is that many of those people backpedaled on some of that. The credit union has actually said there's not a problem with the increase of the corporate income tax to being the lowest corporate income tax in the country. And indeed, it seems to work okay in Ontario, because heaven knows they are attracting far more venture capital and business than we are in Alberta under the UCP. But I do want to go back to this issue of the conflict of interest legislation. This is a fundamentally important issue. Ms. Smith, you were found to have broken the law in order to interfere with the system of justice to assist with somebody who had been charged with attempting to get people to commit violence against police officers.
We're going to let you
so
get a word
talk
in
about
here, Ms. Smith.
instability. That does not engender trust. That, more than that,
Ms.
it
Smith, please
engenders
go ahead.
fear on the part of Albertans.
Ms. Notley, the NDP, and the CBC lied for months, saying that I was calling Crown prosecutors and my staff were calling Crown prosecutors, and it wasn't true. And that is what the Ethics Commissioner found. Look, I'm a non-lawyer, and I know that I need to be able to talk to my Justice Minister, and I'm looking forward to advice on how to be able to do that more constructively in the future. I think that's important for us to be able to get those kind of rules set out. But I will say, we continue to have this issue. I am running on my record. Ms. Notley is running away from hers, and there is a reason for that. The Global Petroleum Survey is one of the surveys that looks at what our business environment looks like. When she got elected in 2015, we were number 3 in the world. By 2018, we were number 43 in the world. This is the reason she doesn't want to talk about her record.
Forgive us. We are running out of time. We're almost at the end of the debate, so we do have to move on.
We do. We have one final wild card question, and here is CDTV's Courtney Theriault.
Well, thanks again. Both parties have insisted they would increase the number of police officers in major centers. But on the surface, that would only allow them to better respond to crimes as they're committed. So in terms of creating safer communities, beyond boots on the ground, what distinguishes your approach from your opponents? And we'll go to Ms. Notley first.
Well, that's a really very good question. So, I was pleased to see that Ms. Smith made the announcement to restore the funding to police officers that the UCP cut at the beginning of their term by hiring 150 officers. We matched that, and then we also went further and said we would also hire 150 more social workers, mental health therapists, those kinds of folks. We would to help with social disorder on our streets, because we know that's worrisome to people, very worrisome. We also, however, have committed to restoring funding for affordable housing. Under the UCP, we've lost 8,000 affordable housing units, and a further 4,000 people were cut off of shelter allowances. And that level of homelessness has created a real crisis, contributing to the concerns around community safety.
All right, Ms. Smith, your time.
Well, first off, we wouldn't defund the police. Again, Ms. Notley has so many defund the police candidates on her platform, on her candidate roster. I've lost count of them as well. The frontline services are demoralized, and we are giving courage and confidence back to our frontline officers. We've embedded sheriffs in both Calgary and Edmonton. We're adding 100 police officers in both Calgary and Edmonton, because we believe that people have a right to take public transit and feel safe. They have a right to go downtown and be able to have a nice dinner or see a game and not worry that they're going to be randomly attacked. And they certainly have a right to walk past an open doorway without having to inhale secondhand crystal meth smoke. We have an approach that is going to make sure that we crack down on public safety and crime and make sure that people feel safe again.
All right, thank you, Ms. Smith. We've got about 90 seconds for this free debate. Ms. Notley.
Well, I need to start by saying when it comes to defunding the police, the UCP actually defunded the police. The money that they used to hire the 150 is a restoration of the money they cut in 2019. And that's on top of additional police grants that they cut from municipal governments right when they first got elected. So actual defunding of the police is something that I think they should take a responsibility for.
You know, one thing I'm so proud about with our UCP record is it's what's being known as the Alberta model for a recovery-oriented system of care. Because we know policing is only one side of the story. The other is getting people the help that they need. And my chief of staff is one of the foremost experts on the recovery-oriented system of care. We got rid of the $40 per day user fee that Ms. Notley charged. We've added 10,000 treatment beds. We're building recovery communities, some in conjunction with First Nations partners. And we are going to make sure that every single person who wants addiction treatment has access to a treatment bed.
Quickly,
those two things have to go together.
Quickly, Ms. Notley, you've got 20 seconds to rebut.
Well, listen, I think more recovery beds is a great thing, absolutely. And I actually agree with the fact that the accommodation charge associated with those beds that's been in place for 2 decades is now gone. That's great news, but there's more to it. There's more about wraparound services, transitional housing, those kinds of supports, and those remain unfunded right now.
Okay, thank you. Some spirited debate.
Absolutely.
Love it. I love it. Okay. We are now going to head to our closing remarks. Each leader will have 90 seconds.
And this is one final chance for those leaders to make their pitch to Albertans. We start with Danielle Smith.
I first want to say how much of an honor it's been to be your premier for these last 7 months. I've been overwhelmed by the generosity and kindness of Albertans that I meet every single day. These last 3 years have been difficult for all of us. And now the wildfires are testing our resolve as a people once more. But I know that together we will overcome every challenge we face, whether it's a pandemic, a flood, a fire, or economic headwinds. We will take care of one another, and we will move our province forward to a better future. My commitment to each of you, if re-elected, is to serve you with everything I have and to the best of my ability, however imperfect that may be at times. I will continue to focus on growing and diversifying our amazing economy, making life more affordable and our communities safer, and improving healthcare for all Albertans. And I will carefully listen to you and my UCP caucus, because whatever I may have said or thought in the past while I was on talk radio, Albertans are my bosses now, and my oath is to serve you and no one else. I love this province and everything it stands for. We are a land of entrepreneurs and innovators, of pioneers and farmers, of families and communities, a place where the best and brightest come from every corner of the world to join us in building one of the greatest places on earth to live and work and raise a family. From the bottom of my heart, thank you and good night.
Okay, 90 seconds over to you, Ms. Notley.
Well, thank you so much. Tonight, ask yourself, who do you trust to build a better future? Who will focus on the things that actually matter to you? Now, Ms. Smith has spent her entire career campaigning for Albertans to pay out of pocket for basic health care. She's also campaigned to pull Alberta out of the Canada Pension Plan, something that would create huge instability in your retirement. Today, she was found to have broken the law by interfering with our justice system. This is just not how our province should be run. Every day is a new drama. You just don't need to put up with this. Enough is enough. So my offer to you is stable, predictable, thoughtful leadership that you can count on. It's time to get back to the things that matter to people. I will make life more affordable, capping car insurance and lowering your utilities. I will support our entrepreneurial spirit by cutting to zero small business taxes and creating more jobs. And because I'm passionate about making sure your family has health care that you always need without paying for it, I have a balanced, costed plan to make sure you get a family doctor. So that is a better future for Alberta. Now, you may not always agree with me, and I may not have always gotten it right, but I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. If I am Premier again, I will work daily to earn your trust and to focus on your priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Notley. Unfortunately, we are out of time. That does wrap up the 2023 Alberta Provincial Leaders Debate. Our thanks once again to NDP Leader Rachel Notley and UCP Leader Danielle Smith for taking part tonight.
Also, a big thank you to our panelists for participating. And here's this, a reminder, Election Day is just 11 days away. May 29th, it is your chance to exercise your democratic right to vote.
Thank you for watching, and good night from Edmonton.
CPAC brings you
Welcome back, everyone. This is True North's live election night. Well, not election night. No, that's in 11 days. They just said it. But our live debate night show for the Alberta election, the one and only chance for us to see the leaders in action. William, I'm going to need you to take another sip and turn that around. You did it all wrong. There you go. There you go. That is our True North mug. By the way, we just have one left. So anyone who donate the next person who donates $150 gets one of those True North mugs. A very limited run. We only had 5, and there is just one remaining. And I mean, we thank all of you for your generous support of independent media. In this case, we're bribing you with a mug, but it's actually a very good mug. I was drinking my evening coffee out of mine, and there was enough room in it for enough coffee to get through what were at some points a bit of a slog, but let's just talk about format here for a moment. I'm Andrew Lawton, joined by Rachel Emmanuel and William McBeth. This was the one chance for these two leaders to go head-to-head, and it was 1 hour with commercial breaks. I mean, did we even scratch the surface, Rachel?
Yeah, I definitely felt like it could have been a little bit longer. It didn't feel like we heard from them too much, and it was kind of over before I knew it. Often by the time we get to the end of these things, I'm like, oh, thank goodness it's over. But in this case, I was like, oh, it's over already. So definitely could have gone on for a bit longer. They could have been given a little bit more time for debate. I would have been a little bit more interested to really dig into some of the public safety stuff. The UCP is announcing really novel ideas on how to deal with a mental health and addictions crisis. And I know that Danielle Smith did get an opportunity to bring up some of those policies, but we hardly heard about that. We certainly didn't hear what Notley's plan on mental health and addictions was, and the two didn't really have an opportunity to go toe-to-toe on that specific topic, which is a very big topic in the province right now. And as I mentioned, the UCP is doing really novel things on it, and they have announced some pretty big policies on that. So I definitely could have heard from them a bit more. Also on format, just a personal pet peeve of mine. I hate when they have multiple moderators. I hate when they include a million different journalists to ask questions. I know it's because they just can't agree, the debate consortium and the journalists who are actually organizing it, they just simply can't agree who's going to be put in charge of it, because all of the outlets want their reporters having FaceTime and to get sort of that credibility. But I think it's better when they just pick one moderator, one person's asking the questions and keeping the debate running smoothly. Just a personal preference of mine. I think it's silly, especially when you know the reasons behind the scenes as to why they felt the need to include everyone. But I did feel like the moderators did a fairly good job of keeping them moving things along. And, you know, both of the leaders were pretty respectful and didn't interrupt each other too much, which sometimes can be a huge headache when you're watching debate. So that part of it I thought was pretty effective.
Yeah, the questions I thought were generally fair. I thought they could have been more of them. I thought there could have been a little bit more opportunity for, I don't want to say confrontation, but certainly for exchange between the two candidates. I also realized that I said the next donor to True North who donated more than $150 would get the mug, but I didn't give you the link again. So that is donate.tnc.news. And even if you're not chipping in because you want the last mug, you might want to chip in because you value the work we're doing. And I'll go back to what I said earlier, which is that Rachel Emmanuel, who's been doing a great job covering the campaign, was banned from going to the debate to talk to the leaders in the post-debate scrum because the mainstream media want to keep their little protectionist bubble, or I don't even know if you can call it a racket, going, which is what the Alberta Legislative Gallery has basically done to exclude independent media. So we're still covering it. We're still going to ask questions to Rachel Notley and Danielle Smith on the campaign trail. But let's focus on the debate in particular here, because healthcare obviously came up. And I mean, we weren't even like 2 minutes in before Rachel Notley once again starts talking about Danielle Smith wanting to privatize healthcare. And I fear Rachel Notley might have been watching the pre-show, because she made the exact same criticism of Danielle Smith that I made just a few moments before the program started. Let's talk about this clip here for a moment of Rachel Notley attacking Danielle Smith on past support for changing the healthcare system.
Let's talk about something else, though. Let's talk about healthcare costs as they impact affordability. You claim that you won't raise costs, but Danielle, you know, I've known you for at least a decade, perhaps more, and I've watched your career, and you have argued passionately in multiple settings for your belief that you care about passionately, those were your words, making people pay more for their healthcare. So my question to you is, why are you not running on the thing that you believe? Why are you not being honest with Albertans? Why aren't you making the argument that you think having them pay more is what you want? Because you've said it in video, in papers, in speaking tours, in the legislature for over a decade.
Ms. Smith, we're going to let you jump in here.
I know Ms. Notley likes to show grainy videos of things I said while I was on radio. And the reason she does that is she doesn't want to run on her record. And the reason she doesn't want to run on her record is it was an absolute disaster. She racked up $70 billion in debt, more debt than any premier, actually all premiers combined in Alberta's provincial history. She talk about deception. Did you remember her running on a carbon tax in the last election? I sure didn't. And that increased the cost of everything. We eliminated it, but Justin Trudeau wouldn't let us keep it off. And now Ms. Notley has not stood up to her boss, Jagmeet Singh, in Ottawa, and worked with us to say don't increase that carbon tax any further. And in fact, certainly don't increase it 300%. No one has any credibility talking about affordability as long as they support a carbon tax, which is going to increase the cost of everything.
I've got to say, William, I think Danielle Smith might have been taking your advice, because you mentioned earlier that, you know, the one thing you didn't like was that she wanted to answer the questions. And there she's asked, you know, how do you account for 10 years of pushing for privatizing or in some way privatizing healthcare? And she says, the NDP doesn't want to talk about their record. So I thought she answered the question well, but it was interesting that really the premise that Rachel Notley went to is, listen, we know you believe this. Why aren't you talking about it now?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are a fair and objective observer, which we all are in our own mind, there is no doubt that Danielle Smith came out ahead in tonight's debate. I think she did a better job of landing on the points she wanted to talk about, including the progress that she's made on healthcare, hiring more nurses, reducing wait times for ambulances, key metrics that she could point to. The trouble Rachel Notley had, I think, was trying to be critical of Danielle Smith while also not wanting to talk about her own time in office. And I don't think she was well enough prepared by her team in order to take the hit from Danielle talking about, well, when you were premier. Because that is, by the way, something she's never had to face in a debate before. Of course, you know, the last debate she had was in 2015. She'd been an opposition politician. It's the first debate where she's ever had a record, and she seemed unable to effectively pivot. So when it comes to healthcare, I'm sure Danielle Smith would prefer not to talk about it to the degree possible. It's what we in politics called a shield issue. The more you talk about it, the more you might lose votes. But she did what she had to do, and I think ultimately people are going to look at that debate and think it was Danielle Smith who came out on top.
Yeah, one thing that is interesting, normally in Canadian politics, if you lose an election after you've been in power, you're kind of done. You just take that as your cue to retire. Stephen Harper in 2015, Kathleen Wynne in 2018 in Ontario, and so on. So the idea of running again, of trying to do the Grover Cleveland thing, it's not without precedent in Canadian politics. Certainly a lot of previous prime ministers were in and out and whatnot. But it is rare that you get two people that have both been premier that are running, and two people that both have a record. And I was wondering what you kind of thought of that dynamic, because we didn't hear all that much of Rachel Notley wanting to defend Rachel Notley's record. In fact, even in her closing statement, she tried to do a bit of cleanup by saying, yeah, I didn't always get it right.
No, you're absolutely right. And I mean, the fact is, the reason Rachel Notley led this party into the election is because she is by far the biggest asset that the Alberta New Democrats have. And I mean, even if you're not on her side, you only have to look at who the other senior MLAs are in that New Democrat caucus to know that Rachel Notley is as good as it gets. And anybody else was going to come across as being incredibly left-wing and out of touch with everyday Albertans. That being said, Danielle only had to defend the last 9 months, give or take. It was a period of economic recovery. She came in after the last premier was suffering a pretty low ebb in his popularity, and a lot of things went well over the last 9 months. Rachel Notley had to govern during a time of economic distress, low energy prices, and higher unemployment. That was always going to be a more difficult period of time to govern. That being said, she did a lot of things that made the situation worse. And I think Danielle did highlight some of those in the debate tonight and remind people when she was in premier, when Rachel Notley was premier, things were really not good here in Alberta. And if you think about the fact that this election is primarily targeting Calgary, that's about oil and gas. That's about jobs and private sector business. And this is the part of the province that's going to be most impacted by that large tax increase that Rachel Notley and the Democrats are proposing for Alberta businesses.
What stood out tonight for you, Rachel?
I'm just still caught on the fact that Rachel Notley wore the conservative blue to the debate. Don't leaders generally wear the color of their party? I mean, I understand like orange is a super ugly color. I wouldn't want to wear it either, but I just thought that was very notable, especially as we're talking about how Rachel Notley doesn't really want to run on her record as premier, and she's not really bringing it up, and she's not really advocating for it or advertising it. And then the fact that we've talked so much about how she's been appealing to moderates, and then she shows up tonight in a conservative blue. I just thought that was a little bit funny, but it was, again, a very strong performance from Danielle tonight. I just don't think I've ever seen her so enthusiastic, so lighthearted, really positive to be there looking forward. I think she did exactly what she needed to do during tonight's debate to appeal to people who, aren't sure how they feel, aren't sure how they're going to vote for her. We reported on a poll that showed about half of Albertans said they were going to watch tonight's debate and decide how to cast their ballot based on what they heard. I sort of doubt the number is that high. Usually not that many people watch a political debate. I think maybe it helped that it was only an hour in that case, but I think Danielle Smith did exactly what she needed to do if she's looking to appeal to those people. And, Rachel Notley just seemed a little bit rattled. Her opening statement wasn't very strong. She seemed a bit caught off guard. Public speaking can absolutely be tricky. I just don't feel like she ever really caught up to where she was at, and she's had a little bit of a break from doing these types of speeches. So maybe she was just caught off guard. But Danielle Smith was really on her game tonight. Maybe the fact that she took time away from the campaign to do those 2 debates in her local riding, which a lot of people said is a terrible idea, maybe that actually benefited her tonight because she just had experience doing 2 back-to-back debates along with all the debate prep that we know goes into an event like tonight.
Yeah, I mean, although I hope for Rachel Notley's sake that she's, doing better than an NDP candidate in rural Alberta who's never going to win. I hope that, but you never know. Sometimes the local candidates do surprisingly well in debates. I had kind of, when I ran for office years ago, I had a bit of a home field advantage in the radio debate. So I kind of went in just completely fine with anything that was going to happen there. Let's talk about, I mean, when you bring up Rachel Notley trying to kind of be everything to everyone right now, I have to share this clip. This is a critique that really goes to be a bit of a blast from the past in Alberta politics, the way that Rachel Notley takes aim at Danielle Smith here.
Yes, well, I mean, I think the fundamental problem here is that Albertans are deeply concerned at the notion of a Danielle Smith-led government reforming healthcare in any way, shape, or form. She claims she's guaranteed that nobody will ever pay for a doctor, but Ms. Smith, I was with you in the legislature in 2014. You stood up and you guaranteed you would never cross the floor. 3 weeks later, you crossed the floor. Your understanding of the word guarantee is very different than that of most Albertans. And most people are deeply, deeply troubled at the prospect of you reforming healthcare based on your 15-year record of advocating to make people pay out of pocket.
Okay, we are.
I mean, look, it's a legitimate criticism. Danielle Smith herself would acknowledge that, has acknowledged that. It's a weird one to kind of have Rachel Notley hold up as being so significant here. It's like, you're a woman of your word, but you crossed the floor 8 years ago. Rachel, do you think anyone will care about that watching? I mean, the people that were the most angry about that are not Rachel Notley fans.
No, I don't think that Albertans really care about that anymore. I think the conversation has changed. I think that Rachel Notley is stuck living in the past a little bit on this. The people that were upset at Danielle Smith for crossing the floor are the same people that decided whether or not they wanted to vote for her in the United Conservative Party leadership race that happened just last summer. And guess what? She won that race. So we know that Albertans, by and large, have moved on from that and past it. The people that are looking to decide whether to vote for Danielle Smith or not, that is not the question at the top of their mind right now. Maybe a small part of it factors into whether or not they feel they can trust her, but I suspect people have much more prominent and present concerns when we look at the state of our economy around us, and I doubt that that is something that's influencing their decision as to whether or not to vote for Smith or Notley on May 29th.
The one thing when you have a one-on-one debate that you always want to look out for is that real sort of tension, that sparks fly moment. Tonight, that was a pretty clear-cut one. There was one real candidate for that. Let's roll that clip when the NDP's penchant for hacking, apparently, was put front and center.
The other thing I would say, I've been in office since 2008. I have never actually breached the conflict of interest legislation. Ms. Smith cannot say the same.
Well, I guess you did have an MLA who hacked our healthcare system. I can tell you.
Do you really want to talk about our candidates and our MLAs?
Well,
like, seriously, I do not think you're going to win that one.
I
That is
have to
not
tell you,
one you want to do.
I have to tell you, when we're putting together our affordability payments, to have to ask whether it was going to be hack-proof from the NDP, that's not something that Ms. Notley should be very proud of. What I will also say is that when she came out with her costing document, it was almost immediately discredited because Todd Hirsch said he hadn't done the analysis on what kind of impact it would have on chasing away investment. Others did. Trevor Toome did. Jack Mintz did. There are several business reporters who did. The Alberta Chamber of Commerce did. And what they have said is that would create instability. And the instability would chase additional investment out. It would chase jobs out. And we would go back and have a rerun of what we did in the period of time that Ms. Notley doesn't want to talk about, which was when she was Premier.
Okay, I mean, it wasn't like a total brawl. I mean, we didn't have, like microphones and lecterns being knocked over and anything like that. There wasn't a lot of shouting, but it was one of the feistier moments here. You've got Rachel Notley going to the "you broke the law," and then Danielle Smith saying, "Hey, an MLA was hacking," and then Rachel Notley. I mean, you just heard the clip. I don't need to do the dramatic reenactment of it. Although, if we could, if you want us to do that, that could be part of the post show here. But William, I mean, let me just get your take on this here, because a lot of the things that consume media coverage, we were talking about this earlier. Certainly, legacy media coverage are not the things that matter. And in fact, I don't even know if elections are won and lost on the things that matter to people. I think they're won and lost on what you'd call, if you were putting this debate together, the wild cards. This ethics commissioner report, this candidate said this, and so on. So the stuff that was there, MLA hacking, which I had kind of forgotten about, you broke the law, which is not a particularly accurate interpretation of what happened today. But does this stuff land?
In my opinion, no. In fact, I think very few people had any idea what either of them were talking about during this segment. If you could remember former NDP MLA Thomas Dang breaking somehow into the COVID vaccine proof system, good for you. Congratulations. But at the same measure, I don't think a lot of people really understood what the whole Danielle Smith interfered in something problem was either. I mean, look, how many months did we spend, did media spend talking about Justin Trudeau and SNC-Lavalin? I mean, it went on forever, and I don't think in the next election anybody's going to have any recollection of what it went about, or if they do, they really don't care. What do people care about, in my opinion? Things like cost of living, how much it costs people to fill up their gas tank, how much it costs people to pay their electricity bill, how much they pay in taxes, and they care about, are we safe in our communities? I'm sick of trying to get onto an LRT or a bus and being hassled by someone who's high as a kite, or I feel unsafe when I take my kids to the park. And where Danielle, I think, benefited from this debate in particular is the very first question was on cost of living, and the very last question was on law and order and safe communities. And that was a perfect lineup, in my opinion, for her, because she got to start and end on her very best points. But you're right. I mean, so much trivia on on this MLA did this and that MLA did that. You know what I care about? Who's going to cut my taxes? Who's going to make my electricity bill cheaper? Who's going to make sure I don't get stabbed on the way to work in the morning? That's what everyday people care about.
Let's get your take on that, Rachel.
Yeah, I think that what William said is exactly what I was thinking, in that if those types of things really landed, then Justin Trudeau would no longer be prime minister in Ottawa. But these types of discussions are very complicated. You know, there's a lot of things to follow. Even the report that came down today, there were some parts of it that absolved Danielle Smith, other parts that said you contravene, you know, the Ethics Act by having this discussion with your justice minister. Very convoluted. Each side sort of picks the bits that they want to take from it and they run with that and ignores the rest that's inconvenient to their points. And then everyone in the middle just doesn't pay attention because they're like, this side saying it's blue and this side saying it's yellow. So I'm just going to focus on the things that really matter to me, which is exactly what William just said. Most people are focused on public safety and making sure that they can pay for their rent every month and that they can afford gas and hoping that their taxes get cut so they have a little extra money to finally go on that family vacation that they've put on hold for 3 years because they just simply can't afford it or because they haven't been allowed to travel. So, you know, these are things that most people are focused on right now. If you're really into politics, if you're Politico, you're going to know the history of some of these zingers that were passed back and forth. Makes it a little bit funny, makes it entertaining, but at the end of the day, it's not really going to stick. It's just something for the base to kind of rally around and chuckle around. And earlier in the pre-show, I said I wasn't sure who was going to be lobbing insults one or the other. I said I expected Rachel Notley would certainly be lobbing insults at Danielle Smith because that's what the entire NDP campaign has been about. But, you know, that was admittedly a pretty good comeback from Smith on her part about dang there. And it was also just totally unexpected from her because you don't really see her engage in that type of politics too much, and she did keep things pretty positive today during the debate. So again, I just think that whole exchange probably blew over most people's heads because they aren't really familiar with the history there.
Yeah, that's fair, and it's one of these things that makes, you know, us freaks who live and breathe this stuff like, oh, ooh, and then but everyone else was like, what are they even talking about? Get back to like get back to the tax thing that you guys were talking about. I mean, among people that are watching debates, and that in and of itself is a bit of a challenge because these things, you know, we want to believe that everyone in the province is just on tenterhooks and that undecided voters are, you know, just eager to make their decision, but in a lot of cases, the people that probably could benefit the most from it are just living their lives. And I think that's why there's a great opportunity for a leader who's going to come in and say, even not with an unabashedly libertarian stance, but a leader that's going to say, I'm the premier that's going to make it so you can go back to not caring about government and not caring about politics. And I'm the leader that's going to make it so you don't need to wonder if I'm going to write off your job and your industry. And to go back to what we were talking about earlier about the divide between the Alberta NDP and the federal NDP, you do not get to, even as a socialist in Alberta, say the quiet part out loud, which is that you don't like the oil and gas sector. I mean, Rachel Notley has come out against, in a very, very tacit way, the just transition, which I've covered on my show. I know you've covered, Rachel, which is basically the federal government's desire to transition employment from people in the oil and gas sector to green energy. Rachel Notley kind of issued like one sort of comment on this. I think it was back in January. Yeah, it's not constructive, but has not campaigned against it. She's not rallied against it. It's kind of just paying lip service to it. And Danielle Smith did bring that up with her. This was the criticism that I thought was a very fair one on Rachel Notley and the just transition.
Ms. Notley didn't stand up when Justin Trudeau canceled Northern Gateway. She didn't stand up when Energy East pulled the plug. She didn't stand up when they brought in a tanker ban off the West Coast for our product. And she didn't stand up when the No More Pipelines bill was passed.
Well,
she will not stand up.
In fact, you know that's not true. You commented on the fact that I made submissions to the Senate. You know that that's what I did on both of those issues.
It was too late. And I must tell you, where do you think Justin Trudeau got the idea for just transition and for an emissions cap and for a carbon tax? He got it from Ms. Notley when she was premier, and she's going to continue to implement these same kind of policies, and she's going to walk in lockstep with Justin Trudeau on making sure that they get implemented, and that's only going to harm our economy.
And basically, that is Danielle Smith trying to link the NDP to people and ideas and parties that are not at all popular in Alberta right now. And I think something like that is probably not only valid as far as a critique, but I think it's genuinely true.
Well, yeah. I mean, in politics, we always say fight your least popular opponent. You know, you have the choice of fighting your local candidate, your opposing political party, or your political party leader. But in Alberta, of course, we have a ready-made opponent who is deeply unpopular in this province. That's Justin Trudeau and his Liberal government. And so I think you saw tonight, Danielle Smith very consciously making that effort to link Justin Trudeau to Rachel Notley, saying how much they agree, how often they cooperated, how much she supported him. And to be honest, I think they probably would have been better off starting that initiative well before the election. I think they should have been doing it from the moment that Danielle had become premier. But as we say, better late than never. And I think it was an effective strategy in this debate to try and say, look, Rachel Notley and Justin Trudeau, her best friend in Ottawa, don't like Alberta. They don't like oil and gas. They don't want us to succeed, and they want to shut down our most important industry.
Yeah, Rachel, I know they haven't been getting police to remove you from Rachel Notley's press conferences, so you've been able to hear what she said and hear what reporters have asked her about. Does she give a coherent position on where she stands on oil and gas, or is she kind of equivocal about it?
She's been pretty ambiguous. She's presenting herself during this election as very pro-energy. During the debate, she says she's for energy jobs, and she's also saying that she's for, reducing emissions and the jobs that would come along with that, which ironically is something that Danielle Smith says all the time. Danielle Smith isn't against reducing emissions. She often touts different ways that we could do it in the province while also supporting our energy sector. So they would actually be quite aligned with that during this leadership race, during this election as well. But again, this is just another instance of Rachel Notley not running on her actual record as premier, and us not even being sure if she's meaning what she's saying or if she's just saying stuff to appeal to moderates and not to come across as a radical, someone who would be likely much more aligned with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and her federal counterpart, Jagmeet Singh. And even at one point during the debate, I thought this was particularly funny. Danielle Smith actually said to Rachel Notley, "Oh, well, Justin Trudeau got his idea for just transition from you." So certainly she was doing her best to sort of stick that to Notley. We'll see if it works. I'm very curious to see what happens on May 29th. Both of these leaders are trying so hard to present themselves as rational, trustworthy, reasonable-minded, moderate leaders, and I'm just very interested to see what's going to happen. I don't think anyone can genuinely say they know at this point with the polls being as close as they are, but it's definitely a nail-biter of an election.
Yeah, let's be a bit more forward-looking here. The election is on Monday, May 29th, and I should tell you right now that we are going to have a very special live election night show for you on Monday, May 29th. I'll be hosting that from Alberta. We'll have Rachel playing a very key role. I don't know what we decided for William yet, so let us know in the comments what we should do with him. I think he's invited on account of he's our COO. But we also have some other guests and panelists and, of course, the results. And I always get very nervous about this because you may remember the infamous, 2021 or 2020? No, 2021 Conservative leadership race. What year was that? No, it was 2020 because the election was in 2021. And it was the Conservative leadership race that was supposed to be an hour and ended up going until 3 a.m. Before they determined that Erin O'Toole was the leader for 18 months or whatever. So in any event, we are hoping that the elections will not be as long because I will need to fill my True North coffee mug with a lot of coffee to get through it. But that's going to be coming up on May 29th. Let me just ask both of you here, what do you think will happen in the next little while? Because obviously elections can sometimes be derailed in the week and a half, 2 weeks before Election Day. That's when I think a lot of the times if there's a really terrible story that's going to drop, it tends to come out. We also know that leaders will really focus on those key battlegrounds. And I would be surprised at this point, and you may have different thoughts on this, Rachel, if either Rachel Notley or Danielle Smith really leaves Alberta for the next 11 days.
Yeah, so just before I get into that, I just wanted to mention to the viewers that one of my friends who is a Liberal Party staffer, he works for one of the Liberal MPs in Alberta, texted me and said, huge win for Danielle tonight. So I think across the board, people are generally accepting that she was the victor of tonight's debate for the reasons that we've just discussed in length. As for what I expect to see over the next week, I think that we can expect some opposition research from the NDP dropping on Danielle Smith and some of her other candidates. They're going to be trying to make them look crazy and untrustworthy unnecessary and hypocritical in their comments. I think that Danielle Smith is going to have to focus very heavily on pushing the UCP's messaging and not getting off topic. Of course, any day as a party that you spend responding to opposition research and attacks is pretty much a day wasted on the campaign trails, because then simply that disagreement will dominate headlines. Also, Danielle Smith hasn't really spent that much time in battleground Calgary, largely due to the fires that happened up north. She had to, at the beginning of the campaign, head up north to attend to those fires, and that was the appropriate thing for her to do, but she has been removed from Calgary for much of the campaign so far, and then she spent 2 days in her riding, as I mentioned, which I know many people in the party thought wasn't a good idea and were not too happy about. So now there's a week left. I think we're going to see her coming out and doing some campaigning. I think the party's been a little bit quiet on some of their campaigns. They've held a couple announcements which were non-announcements, just sort of attacking the NDP's record and their policies. So I think we need to see just a consistent, straightforward campaign. I expect we'll see some basic policies being announced, and maybe one more big one between now and then. But I think really the important thing for Danielle is just to come out here and to get some face time with the voters. Rachel Notley has been campaigning very hard. They're doing about 2 events a day right now. They've pretty much just been in Calgary as well, a little bit up in Edmonton, a little bit down in Lethbridge. But you're 100% right. The campaign is totally focused on Calgary, and I think that's where we can expect to see things dominate in the next week.
What are you looking out for, expecting, hoping for, fearing in the next 11 days, William?
So this is the period of the campaign that's the worst. It's because you've almost announced everything you've got. If you've had to put out your costed platform, you don't really have any more magic things to pull out of the bag and talk about. So now you have
But wait, what's this? Look under your chairs, everyone.
That's right. You get a tax cut and you get a tax cut. But so the problem is you have to be very disciplined at this point. You have to stay on message. You have to avoid distraction. And I will say this is where Danielle Smith traditionally has had some challenges. She does get drawn off her message sometimes. We say she won the debate tonight. She didn't. She did very good, but that was an hour. Now she has 11 days that she has to try and stay on message. And the Democrats are going to continue to drop examples of her or her candidates saying things that are gonna rub Alberta voters possibly the wrong way. So if I were her, I would be trying to do every positive photo op I could think about between now and Election Day. Serving coffee at a Tim Hortons, planting a tree with a Boy Scout or a Girl Guide troop, whatever she can come up with. And whenever she's asked, she has to be disciplined enough to say this election is about 4 terrible years of Rachel Notley, just as she was when she was premier last time, or 4 more years of opportunity and economic growth under a UCP government. And she has to be disciplined enough not to get pulled off that message. So these 11 days are going to feel like a long time for those two parties.
Well said, Rachel and William. It's great to have you both tuned in this evening. And I'll just make one final plug here. The work we do at True North, having Rachel out there covering the campaign, having William and I here tonight doing our election night show, all of the coverage we do at True North is only made possible because of people who support the work that we're doing. And tonight we had a little bit of fun with donors over $150 getting the True North coffee mug. I don't know if we got rid of the I think we still have the one more left. So there's a chance to snag that by heading over to donate.tnc.news, donate.tnc.news. Well, supplies last, William not included. But we do thank you so much, all of you, for your generous support of independent media and of True North. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. So that does it for us. I know we'll have Alberta Roundup on Saturday. We'll have the Andrew Lawton Show tomorrow. And we'll have True North's live election night show on May 29th. So whether you are an Albertan or hopeful Albertan or someone in another province for whom Alberta might be calling, we invite you to tune in on that for the results, the commentary, the analysis, the jokes, the fundraising plugs, and all that. A big thanks to Sean and Harrison and Steve and Phil for all their help behind the scenes tonight, and for Candace Malcolm giving us this great platform here at True North. I know she is watching, and I know we'll be back soon enough at True North, and she appreciates all your well wishes and kind words. So that does it for us. Thanks again, everyone. God bless you, and have a wonderful night.